Chapter 358. When she said this, many people in the crowd panicked. If she followed Long Cheng Ting Shui's words and proved that she had nothing to do with the poisoning of the 1,000 people, then they would still have a lot of loopholes to exploit. But if Gong Yimo directly proved that the potatoes were not poisonous, then the 1,000 people's illness would not be her responsibility, but Long Cheng Wu Ji's investigation. Then why did they go through so much trouble and scheme? For what? At this moment, Long Cheng Wu Ji's heart had already turned cold. He had a premonition that this matter might not be Gong Yimo's doing. But if it was not her doing, then it was Lu Yi's people who harmed themselves. This ending was even harder for him to accept. All right. His voice was heavy, as if from the moment Gong Dai appeared, he seemed to have been drained of all his energy, leaving only emptiness. He looked at Gong Yimo. As long as you can prove that the fruits are not poisonous, then you are innocent. Gong Yimo smiled. It's a promise. King, please send someone to the Cha tribe's cellar and bring some fruits over. Long Cheng Wu Ji nodded. Very quickly, someone brought over a basket of potatoes. These were mostly in good condition, obviously they had been carefully stored. Then Gong Yimo walked to the front of the bamboo basket and reached into it, then took out a sprouted potato. Everyone thought that she had taken it out from the basket, but in reality, she had taken it out from her space. But no one would know. Hua Ju Wuyo was originally very nervous, but now seeing that Gong Yimo wanted to use this method to prove herself, she could not help but laugh. She had poisoned the entire Cha tribe's fruit. No matter if it was good, bad, or in the ground, there was not a single one that was not poisonous. The small bowl of muddy soup that the baby had eaten was already her miscalculation. She could guarantee that there would not be any problems with the rest. As long as Gong Yimo ate it, she would definitely die. Anyway, as long as Gong Yimo died, it did not matter whether she was innocent or not. But would Gong Yimo let her off so easily? She held the potato in her hand and walked in front of Hua Ju Wuyo, asking her, "You're saying that all fruits are poisonous? It's just that the ones that haven't sprouted are less poisonous, while the ones that have sprouted are more poisonous, right?" At this moment, Flower Boat Warrelis was in a difficult position. How could she say no? So she nodded. Gong Yimo smiled. Then, are you saying these words in your own name, or do you represent the position of the Hua Ju family, or the position of the sacred lake? On this point, Hua Ju Wuyo did not dare to speak carelessly. However, if she did not say anything, it would make her seem guilty. She gritted her teeth and said, "As a goddess, I say this conclusion. This fruit is clearly poisonous." Very good. Gong Yimo smiled with satisfaction. Does that mean that if I didn't die after eating it, it means that you're lying and someone is framing you? Hua Ju Wuyo was afraid that she would play tricks and hesitated. Gong Yimo continued, "Or you can eat it. I guarantee that you won't die." He would definitely die. Hua Ju Wuyo's face darkened. "Yes, as long as you eat it and don't die, I'll take it that you're right." She did not believe that Gong Yimo was immune to poison. Gong Yimo smiled and crushed the potato in her hand. Then, she pinched the clean part in the middle and ate it. She really ate it. Long Cheng Wu Ji wanted to stop her, but he did not know what reason to use. He could only stare at her. At this moment, he was so afraid that something would happen to her. Hua Ju Wuyo saw her eat it with her own eyes. There was no mistake. However, eating a little was not enough for her. She continued to slowly eat the crushed part in the middle of the potato. Her every action seemed to tickle Hua Ju Wuyo's nerves. She really ate it, but nothing happened to her. How was that possible? Hua Ju Wuyo walked over to the basket of fruits in disbelief. Could it be that these did not belong to the Cha family? She reached out and picked one up, as if to check it out. At this moment, Gong Yimo appeared behind her like a ghost. "Are you curious why I didn't die?" She lowered her voice and said this behind Hua Ju Wuyo. Her voice was faint, as if it came from the abyss of hell. Hua Ju Wuyo was shocked and was about to speak. Gong Yimo suddenly grabbed her hand and stuffed the fruit in her hand into her mouth. This action frightened everyone. Many people stood up to question Gong Yimo. "What are you doing?" Gong Yimo fiercely restrained Hua Ju Wuyo, who was struggling with all her might. She did not move, But Gong Dai had already stood in front of Gong Yimo. At this moment, he swung his sword and smiled coldly. If royal sister can eat it, why can't she eat it? Everyone, if you take another step forward, this king will make his blood splatter on the spot. Gong Dai's voice was filled with pressure. It actually forced those who wanted to save Hua Ju Wuyo to retreat. Long Cheng Wuji did not move as he watched Hua Ju Wuyo cry for help with tears in her eyes. As for Gong Yimo, her eyes were lowered as she forcefully stuffed the fruit into Hua Ju Wuyo's mouth. She did not let up. Why won't you eat it? She saw her clench her teeth and could not help but find it funny. You won't eat it because it's poisonous. You know what kind of poison it is, right? Hua Ju Wuyo was being restrained by Gong Yimo from behind. Her mouth was being stuffed with Gong Yimo's other hand, so she could not speak. This poison was very strong. If she ate a little, she would die. She did not want to die. She was Lu Yi's future princess. So her tears kept falling. At this moment, she was scared to death. Her tears fell onto the back of Gong Yimo's hand, but Gong Yimo did not let up on forcing Hua Ju Wuyo to eat. Her eyes were filled with ruthlessness. She wanted nothing more than to poison Hua Ju Wuyo to death. Hearing her sobs, Hua Ju Wuyo's father, Hua Ju Yi, was very worried. But with Gong Dai around, he did not dare to go forward. At this moment, he really wished that his son was here. He would definitely save his sister. After playing enough, Gong Yimo finally let go. She let go and Hua Ju Wuyo fell to the ground. Then, she quickly removed the thing from her mouth and vomited non-stop. Actually, she did not eat it at all. But she was afraid. That was a poison that could kill once it came into contact with blood. At this moment, Gong Yimo was also a little tired. She sneered at Long Cheng Wuji and said, "All right, I'm not playing anymore. Let me tell you the truth." She pointed at Hua Ju Wuyo. She refused to eat it because she poisoned all the fruits in the Cha tribe. Otherwise, why would she be so shocked when I ate it? If I made her eat it again, it would be like asking for her life. Gong Yimo laughed mockingly, but I know of a place that she must have forgotten to poison. When she said this, even Hua Ju Wuyo was stunned. At this moment, she could still argue that the Cha tribe's fruits were poisonous because of the soil. It had nothing to do with her, but if Gong Yimo found a non-poisonous fruit in the Cha tribe, then she was dead meat. No way, she had poisoned everything. Even the ones in the ground were not spared. Even Long Cheng Wuji did not believe it. If someone had really poisoned them, would they have let any fish escape the net? Gong Yimo laughed, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. She spoke in a low voice like a demon. I taught them to eat potatoes without the skin. This is the principle of making the best use of everything. I think, in the food trough of the Cha tribe's cattle and sheep, you will definitely find the skin of the uneaten fruit. When that time comes, you will realize that all the fruits in the tribe are poisonous, but the skin of the animals is not. That will be very interesting. Chapter 359. It was interesting, but some people's hearts turned to ashes because of Gong Yimo's word. Gong Yimo clapped her hands. I'm done with my work. As for the evidence and the 1,000 people outside, that's your problem, Lu Yi. When the time comes, I hope King Lu Yi will clear my name. Long Chengting Shui wanted to cause trouble after hearing this. How was the 1,000 people outside not Gong Yimo's responsibility? She had yet to prove that she had nothing to do with their illness. But before she could open her mouth, she was stunned by her brother's gaze. She had never seen Long Chengting Wuji so scary. He was even scarier than the last time she killed 1,000 people. So all her words were stuck in Long Chengting Wuji's throat. Gong Yimo saw this and sneered in her heart. It was time for them to settle their family matters. As an outsider, she shouldn't be a hindrance. Seeing Gong Yimo leave, Long Chengting Wuji also left with an ashen face. The results of the evidence were the same as what Gong Yimo had said. In the livestock's food trough, there was indeed fruit skin. The livestock were fine after eating it, so it wasn't poisonous. This was really a shameful farce. So when the large group of people walked back, most of them didn't look good. They were still chatting and laughing at the banquet in the afternoon, but now they were all feeling guilty. They walked towards the palace. Gong Yimo and Gong Dai were guests from Daiyu State, so they definitely had to stay in the palace. As for the ministers, none of them dared to leave. Didn't they see that the king's face was so gloomy? Hua Ju Wuyo walked at the back of the group with a pale face. Seeing the 1,000 people who were poisoned being brought to the palace, his heart thumped and he became even more afraid. At this moment, someone suddenly stretched out his hand to grab Gong Yimo. Before anyone could react, Gong Dai had already blocked the person with his sword. It was a short old man with white hair. He was very surprised to be blocked, but the moment he saw Gong Yimo, he was stunned. He was clearly stunned. He opened his mouth and unconsciously spat out 2 words. Although others didn't hear it, from the shape of his mouth, people could tell that it was Shuolian. And Shuolian, wasn't that the name of her cheap mother? Gong Yimo widened her eyes and stopped Gong Dai. At the same time, except for King Lu Yi, everyone present knelt down. Even King Lu Yi cupped his fists in greeting. Greetings to the holy ancestor. As soon as he said this, Gong Yimo knew who this person was. He was the guardian of Lu Yi's people. But from his facial features, he didn't look like he was from Lu Yi. Moreover, he was from her clan, her chief. She was a clansman, clansman. Gong Yimo pondering. Similarly, Gong Ju was also surprised. He naturally noticed that Gong Ju called out the name Xue Lian. Isn't that his sister's mother? Similar. They were too similar. Xue Zhon couldn't describe his current feelings. He watched Shuolian grow up and naturally knew what she looked like when she was 17 or 18 years old. But when he thought of her identity, Xue Zhon was shocked. Don't panic. This matter needs to be discussed with the clansmen. Therefore, he looked away after looking at Gong Yimo for a while and said to Longkeng Wuji, "The Holy Lake already knows about today's matter. As a goddess, Flowerboat Wuyo has done such a thing. This old man wants to bring her back to be punished. I hope that King Lu Yi can make things easy for us." Longcheng Wuji glanced at Hua Ju Wuyo. Hua Ju Wuyo was a member of the Holy Lake, and indeed, the Holy Lake had the right to punish him. However, his action of grabbing Gong Yimo made Longcheng Wuji feel that Xue Zhon was biased, so he sneered. "Sure, but Flowerboat Wuyo has committed a heinous crime. She should be punished severely. I hope the Holy Lake will deal with her impartially." His words made Xue Zhon's expression freeze for a moment. Flowerboat Wuyo was shocked. She didn't expect Longkeng Wuji to say something like this. If she was punished severely, wouldn't she lose the right to be a goddess? Without the halo of a goddess, she was just an ordinary 4th daughter of the Flowerboat family. How could she marry Longkeng Wuji? Xue Zhon swallowed his anger and nodded. Then, he looked at Flowerboat Wuyo seriously and said, "You will be punished severely." As he spoke, he left with Flowerboat Wuyo and the girls she brought. Gong Yimo looked at his back and pondered. She tolerated the sneak attack because there was something strange about it. She didn't meet anyone related to Shuolian in her previous life. Why did she meet her in this life? In line with the principle of less trouble is better than more trouble, she didn't care. She also appeased Gong Ju, who was very angry with Xue Zhon. Gong Yimo wasn't interested to know how Longkeng Wuji would deal with his sister. She drank in the afternoon and was tormented by all kinds of things. There was also the matter of Xue Zhon. All she wanted now was to have a good sleep. However, there was someone who made it impossible for her to sleep. Gong Dai reached out to poke her hair and pinch her face. It was as if he was playing with an interesting toy. Gong Yimo closed her eyes and pretended to sleep. However, how could she fall asleep? She opened her eyes and stared at him. "Gong Dai, you're tired from the journey. Don't you want to rest?" His dark eyes lit up. "Yes." As he spoke, he lay down beside her and stared at her. Damn. How could she fall asleep like this? Just as Gong Yimo wanted to chase him away, Gong Dai's eyes suddenly darkened. "Royal sister, don't you miss me at all? We haven't seen each other for almost half a year. Why aren't you excited to see me?" Gong Yimo was sad. She wasn't excited. However, she wouldn't tell Gong Ju how surprised she was when he suddenly appeared in front of her. She also wouldn't tell him that, when she was held tightly in Gong Ju's arms, she was also confused for a moment. She shouldn't have. She wrapped herself in the quilt with grief and indignation and began to reflect on herself. Royal sister. Gong Dai pried open Gong Yimo, who was curled up like an ostrich, and forced her to look into his eyes. For so many days and nights, he missed her so much. How could he allow her to ignore him? What's so interesting about sleeping? Look at me. In front of Gong Yimo, Gong Dai would always put on a cold and serious face and softly say embarrassing things. It was totally different from how he was in front of others. The weather seemed to be hot all of a sudden. Gong Dai's palms were separated by a thin layer of clothes and he could almost burn her skin. What's so nice about you? Being shaken by Gong Dai on the bed like a cat, Gong Yimo couldn't pretend to be an ostrich anymore and asked fiercely. She even opened her eyes wide to take a look. However, she really felt that Gong Dai was different. He was taller, slimmer, and his facial features were more defined. He looked exactly the same as the devilish him in her previous life. However, in this life, his temperament was like bamboo. Most of the time, he was cold and cheerless. He would only show some gentleness when he looked at her. Just a little bit of gentleness was enough to drown a person. Do I look good? He asked. Chapter 360. Seeing that Gong Yimo was in a daze, he couldn't help but smile. This smile was truly deadly. It was like ice and snow melting bit by bit under the warm sunlight, reflecting sparkling and translucent colors. This was the rhythm of completely overshadowing Jin Yun. It's not nice. She dishonestly turned her face and faced Gong Dai with her butt. Her hands unconsciously covered her face, and her heart started to beat faster. What was wrong with her? Why did she feel like she was acting weird when she saw him this time? Gong Dai pursed his lips and smiled. With her back facing him, Gong Yimo couldn't see the affection and slyness in his eyes. Those wicked hands were already on her waist, gently teasing her. Ha 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 ha. Gong Dai, you're dead meat. Gong Yimo's body instantly curled up like a shrimp, and she rolled around on the bed. Gong Dai's hands were empty, and he shamelessly tickled her, just like how she used to laze around in bed when they were young. Seeing that she was about to cry from laughing, Gong Dai reluctantly stopped. However, the moment he stopped, Gong Yimo pounced on him like a hungry tiger. Her eyes flashed fiercely, and she said fiercely, "You're dead meat, Gong Dai. I'm going to kill you. Are you afraid?" Just then, Gong Dai raised his hands high above his head. His cold voice sounded a little expectant. "Come on." It was like punching cotton. Gong Yimo angrily took out a nylon rope from her space and prepared to tie him up. Gong Dai suddenly said, "Royal sister, are you going to do those weird things to me?" He couldn't help but think of the half-burned candle and the leather whip, and he frowned slightly. He thought helplessly that if she really liked it, he would play along. How could Gong Yimo bear to touch him when he was so docile and obedient? She even had the feeling that if she took out her whip and told him to take off his shirt, he would obediently take off his pants as well. Therefore, she put the rope back and took out a lot of gadgets from her space. Gong Dai was a little nervous. Although he knew that the royal sister wouldn't do anything to him, seeing her sitting on him made him nervous for no reason. "Close your eyes," she said loftily like a queen. Gong Dai subconsciously closed his eyes. Then, he felt something cold on his eyes. What was the royal sister applying on his face? It smelled good. Gong Yimo snickered in his ears. This was the makeup she had brought from the other world. There wasn't much left. What she applied on Gong Dai's eyes was black eyeshadow. Originally, she thought that it would be ugly like a panda. However, for some reason, when she applied it on Gong Dai's face, looking at the black blur and slightly upward, it actually gave people a kind of enchanting and dark beauty. Seeing that he wanted to open his eyes, Gong Yimo hurriedly told him not to move. Only then did he behave and obediently let Gong Yimo do whatever she wanted. Gong Yimo took out the powder and lightly patted it on his overly white face. If it was a normal person, they would definitely think that it was feminine, right? However, Gong Dai's long eyelashes fluttered slightly, and it actually gave people a feeling of crystal fragility. What a strange sight. Gong Yimo took out her lipstick and lightly dipped it in her fingertips. Then, she applied it on his light-colored lips, Gong Dai's somewhat hurried breathing blew on her fingertips. Suddenly, she felt a kind of itch in her heart. It was as if someone had used a small brush to tease her heart, causing the rhythm of her breathing to be disrupted. She didn't notice this, but Gong Dai, who was lying under her, did. His hand unconsciously hugged Gong Yimo's waist. Both of them were enjoying this rare peace. The bright red color spread little by little on Gong Dai's lips. His lips were very soft. That thin warmth passed through her fingertips and into her heart, causing her heart to become chaotic. At this moment, both of them didn't speak. It was as if they spoke, something would be disturbed. Gong Dai quietly opened his eyes and looked at Gong Yimo's face, which was just inches away from him. Her breath gently blew on his chin, giving him a kind of tickling feeling. Her hair was hanging to one side, and her brows were slightly furrowed. She seemed to be doing something important. Her little mouth revealed a little bit of her pearly white teeth, and she was gently biting her lower lip. She looked really delicious. At this moment, Gong Yimo had also finished her painting. Gong Dai blinked. That black eyeshadow and red lips made him look extremely devilish and beautiful. If he were a woman, he would definitely be worthy of the title the perfect young man with light and heavy makeup. Their gazes unconsciously collided and couldn't be separated anymore. Only then did Gong Yimo realize how intimate this distance was. She quickly wanted to retreat, but a pair of large hands had already locked onto her waist, making it impossible for her to escape. "Royal sister, what did you do to my face?" Gong Dai asked with a smile. Even if it was Gong Yimo's prank, he wasn't angry at all. Gong Yimo looked at his face and then realized what she had done in a moment of naughtiness. She smiled apologetically. "It's nothing. I just made you look a little better. Royal sister, do you have a mirror in your hand?" Gong Dai sat up and half-hugged her. At this moment, the two of them were in a very intimate position. Gong Yimo was straddling him, while he sat up and hugged Gong Yimo's waist. No, Gong Yimo wanted to escape, but at this moment, she didn't know where to go. Her eyes looked left and right, but she didn't look at Gong Dai. However, her flushed face and bright eyes had already exposed her. Gong Dai pursed his seductive red lips and smiled. This smile was really beautiful and soul-stirring. "Royal sister, if you don't listen to me, I'll teach you a lesson." She didn't know why, but when he used such a frivolous tone to threaten her, Gong Yimo swallowed her saliva for no reason. After a desperate struggle in her heart, she finally swallowed her luck and handed over the makeup mirror from her space with trembling hands. Gong Dai carried her with one hand and used the other to look at the mirror. Gong Yimo was still foolishly smiling and saying, "It looks so good. The color of your lips is too light. It needs to be pressed with a red color like this." Gong Dai suddenly took the mirror away and looked at Gong Yimo with a slight smile. His expression was like that of a vampire in Gong Yimo's time and space, looking at her prey. "Royal sister, the color of your lips is also light." He retracted his hand and Gong Yimo's entire upper body leaned forward and bumped into his chest. Her eyes widened and her face was full of panic. "Let me give you some color." With that said, he gently pressed his lips against Gong Yimo's lips. This kiss was separated by half a year. At this moment, her entire body was trembling slightly, as if she was afraid of something, resisting and longing for something. Her widened eyes gradually lost their luster and then a watery light appeared. Her hands kept pressing on Gong Dai's chest. She thought to herself, "Just a moment, I'll definitely push him away." Chapter 361. The bright red lipstick carried a faint fragrance and a faint sweetness as it melted between their lips and teeth. The red color not only dyed Gong Yimo's lips, but it also followed her lips downwards, slowly dyeing her chin, neck, and collarbone red. After not seeing each other for half a year, Gong Dai's passion was enough to melt a person. At this moment, the sound of footsteps suddenly came, startling Gong Yimo. What was she doing? She came back to her senses and quickly pushed Gong Dai away. She felt that her current appearance must be very ambiguous. She used her sleeve to wipe it, but there were still faint red marks left on her body. Unsatisfied, Gong Dai wanted nothing more than to kill the person who came. What a good opportunity. This was the first time that Royal Sister did not push him away. Therefore, when the person came in, he felt that the temperature in the room was unusually low. He did not enter the inner room, but saw Gong Yimo in the outer room and greeted her respectfully. Princess Jin of Dai Yu State. At this moment, Gong Yimo's heart was beating very fast. She tried her best to ask calmly, "What's the matter?" The person said a little embarrassedly, "I shouldn't have disturbed the princess's rest, but the ancestor suddenly came and wanted to see you." Gong Yimo was a little puzzled. How long had it been? He came to see her as soon as he returned. He must have brought someone to confirm her identity. Perhaps he was not sure that she was Shualian's daughter, so he brought someone to identify her. Gong Yimo quickly calmed down. Once there was a serious matter, she could put her personal feelings aside. At this moment, she considered that her clothes were untidy, so she said to the person who came, "You go first. This princess will come after changing." "Yes." The person bowed his head and retreated. He was still thinking that the princess of Dai Yu State was really beautiful. She was beautiful enough in the past, but now that he saw her, she was like a delicate flower blooming. Unfortunately, he did not dare to look any longer. Gong Yimo was thinking about something. When she returned to the inner room, she was stopped by Gong Dai before she could react. When she saw him, the fiery feeling made Gong Yimo's entire body turn red, revealing a faint pink. It was really a skin that one could not bear to part with. "Royal sister, even now, are you still trying to escape?" He gently lifted Gong Yimo's chin with his finger, forcing her to look at him. Gong Yimo's eyes were still wet, and her gaze was slightly averted. Her rationality told her that this man had killed her in her previous life. Who knew if she would suffer the same fate as Gong Che in this life if she liked him? However, her intuition told her that a person's mind was closely related to the environment they grew up in. She watched Gong Ju grow up, so how could she doubt his feelings? Then, she remembered the vow she made in front of the Bodhisattva in the ruined temple: she would never love anyone again. But more than that, she thought about the little things that Gong Dai had done for her. He was willing to cut his flesh and bleed for her, and he was even willing to die for her. These scenes, alternating and changing, made her head hurt. What did she want? Did she really want to do this? Seeing Gong Yimo frown and reveal a pained expression, Gong Dai's heart softened again. He was only agitated by Gong Che. He was afraid that Gong Yimo would fall in love with another man without him knowing. So, for the past 6 months, he could not wait to come here once he finished his work. If someone caught Royal Sister's eye while he was not around, even if that person was hated by Royal Sister, he wanted to kill that person. It was this uneasiness that made him want Gong Yimo to give him a reassuring answer. It was too painful to worry about personal gains and losses. But, how could all of this be compared to her frown? He reached out and touched Gong Yimo's forehead. She looked up at him. Gong Dai smiled gently and sighed silently. "Forget it. It's my fault. I shouldn't have forced you." He took a deep breath. "I just want to tell you that I have made some achievements in the past 6 months. The Long family has fallen, and our shop has moved to Yuheng. The cooperation with Yu Qi is also settled. They need my support in exchange. So, my influence has infiltrated 3 countries, and it will be more powerful in the future. So, are you happy?" Gong Yimo did not expect Gong Dai to do so many things in just 6 months. He was only 17 years old now. He was already much stronger than her. But, he was pushing himself too hard. "Are you happy?" Gong Dai asked again. Just like when they were young, he was looking forward to Gong Yimo's affirmation. Gong Yimo suddenly frowned and asked, "Are you happy?" In his previous life, Gong Ju loved power because he was surrounded by enemies. Only by firmly grasping power in the palm of his hand could he survive. In this life, she grew up with Gong Dai. Gong Dai did not have a strong desire for anything since he was young. Sometimes, he would even feel disgusted by some schemes. Then, was he happy that he had reached this step? Gong Ju's heart warmed when he heard her words of concern, and he raised his eyebrows slightly. His dark eyeliner should have been threatening, but he was so gentle in front of her. His smile was as clean as ice and snow. "I'm happy." He touched Gong Yimo's face and looked deeply at the fair skin between his fingers. "Royal sister and I. There is a natural distance between us. You and I are related by blood, even if I don't care. So, in order to get you, I must first gain the ability to compete with the world. So, every step forward makes me happy, because I'm one step closer to you. He lowered his eyes and said slowly in a low voice, "You don't have to do anything. You don't have to say anything. You just have to stand where I can see you. I will do my best to walk towards you, no matter what obstacles there are." He smiled as he said, "Even you can't stop me." At that moment, Gong Yimo really had the urge to tell him the truth. Gong Ju had been enduring because she said that she didn't accept blood relatives. She was afraid that the world would hate her. However, all of this didn't exist. They weren't blood relatives at all. Even if they had children, it wouldn't matter. So, he did not have to work so hard to get her, but she could not say this sentence out loud. She had to think about it, and think about it. But her hand still grabbed Gong Dai's hand that was on her face. Her palm was wet and she was obviously nervous. Even her voice was hoarse and almost inaudible. "I won't like anyone, because I once swore that I won't be moved by anyone." Gong Dai's eyes darkened and his heart ached. He wanted to hold Gong Yimo tightly, but she took a step back and let go of his hand. Gong Yimo looked at him nervously. She did not know if what she was going to do next was right, but seeing how sad Gong Dai was, she wanted to tell him this. "I won't like anyone, but if I really like someone, I think that you will also be you." Chapter 362. What did it feel like to fall from heaven to hell, and then return to heaven from hell? Gong Dai didn't know what heaven and hell were, but his emotions fluctuated wildly. With one sentence from her, he instantly went from being at the bottom of the abyss to being at the top of the cloud. This turn of events made him want to give Gong Yimo a big hug. He wanted to hug her and never let her go. As if she had a premonition that Gong Dai's reaction would be very strong, when Gong Dai couldn't help but laugh, Gong Yimo opened the door and quickly ran away without changing her clothes. Gong Dai wanted to chase after her, but he remembered that he still had makeup on his face, and he was already very happy with this promise. He didn't want to force her to do anything else. Gong Yimo thought as she walked. How could she say something like that? It didn't make sense. She must have been kissed by Gong Dai for too long, causing her brain to lack oxygen. That must be it. When Gong Yimo arrived at the main hall of the palace, she was still a little surprised. She stood at the door and tidied herself up before walking in. When she went in, she only heard a burst of crying. It was the voice of the old Wang Fei. Then she saw Long Cheng's Ting Shue's face twisted with hatred. At this moment, when she saw her, she actually screamed and wanted to rush over. "It's all your fault. If it wasn't for you, why would Imperial Brother let me marry into Chopper Country? You witch." She wanted to scratch Gong Yimo's face, but the old consort stopped her. Chopper Country was a small nomadic country vassal to Lu Yi. Its territory was very small, not even 1% of Lu Yi's territory. No wonder Long Cheng Ting Shui was unhappy. But what did it have to do with her? She smiled slightly. "You should restrain yourself. If you anger me, the king of Chopper Country won't be able to protect you." That's right. Chopper Country wasn't Lu Yi. It couldn't bear the anger of the princess of Dai Yu State. Her words made the old consort cry even louder. "Wuji, look at her. You're pushing your sister into the fire pit." Right now, Dragon City Limitless was already annoyed enough. He knew that Gong Yimo would pick on him like this, but he wanted to kill her before she could repay him. He did not believe her. In fact, with Gong Yimo's character, she would definitely not take revenge after Long Chengting Shui married into a small place like Choel. Because at that time, she would not put Long Chengting Shui in her eyes at all. So even though he hated Long Chengting Shui for doing such a thing, he still made this decision for her own good. If Long Chengting Shui continued to stay, she would once again fall into Gong Yimo's hands. He was afraid that her ending would not be like this. However, they did not understand him. "You still have the face to make a scene here." It was the same for the old King Lu Yi. This was an important place in the palace, but he didn't care about his status and shouted loudly. "I don't care, my daughter can't marry that kind of person." How could a king who had been chopped be called a king? The last time he brought someone to pay tribute, the old Lu Yi still remembered that it was an ordinary-looking man who was about 30 years old. His daughter was more delicate than flowers, and she was also young. How could she marry that kind of person? The noise continued. Sometimes it was Long Chengting Shue's crying, sometimes it was the old Wang Fei's persuasion, and sometimes it was the old Lu Yi's angry roar. In this noisy environment, Dragon City Limitless suddenly laughed deeply. His laughter grew louder and louder. However, it made everyone shut their mouths and quiet down. There was also a creepy feeling in their hearts. At this moment, Shuezhon and the others, as well as Gong Yimo, stood there very calmly. However, Long Chengting Shui and the others were not so lucky. Long Chengting Shui suddenly felt a little regretful. She was afraid that with this mess, she would be even more miserable. As expected, after Dragon City Limitless laughed, he stared at her and said coldly, "You don't want to marry? Fine, go cultivate on Paluo Mountain. You choose." The old Lu Yi was stunned. He wanted to say something, but Dragon City Limitless' cold voice sounded. "If you want to go with her to Paluo Mountain, just say it. After all, I, Lu Yi, will not miss out on your offerings." He actually wanted to send his parents to Paluo Mountain. That mountain was filled with devout cultivators. There was nothing there. How were they going to survive there? Dragon City Limitless didn't seem to be joking. This made the old Lu Yi and the old Wang Fei sober up a lot. They revealed a troubled expression. Thinking about it this way, marrying the Chopper King was better than going to Paluo Mountain, right? At least with them there, the Chopper King wouldn't be able to bully his daughter. However, going to Paluo Mountain was equivalent to dying of old age on the mountain. Long Chengting Shui just cried. She didn't expect Dragon City Limitless to be so heartless this time, not giving her any chance. Seeing their silence, Dragon City Limitless asked somewhat cruelly, "Ting Shui, tell me now. Are you going to marry?" "Yes. I'll marry." Long Chengting Shui hurriedly choked out. She was afraid that the angry Dragon City Limitless would change his mind. She was such a sensible person. However, she was very regretful. Back in Lu Yi, the Emperor of Daiyu State wanted her to choose a husband. At that time, she could have chosen anyone rather than marrying the Chopper King. Unfortunately, it was too late to regret. After sending people to send Long Chengting Shui and the others back to rest, Dragon City Limitless rubbed his forehead and looked at Gong Yimo. He was regretting it. However, at that time, he was blinded by anger. Moreover, compared to his own people's conspiracy, he was more willing to believe that it was Gong Yimo's doing. However, reality slapped him hard in the face. At the same time, he hated these people and felt even more ashamed. Therefore, he didn't dare to look into Gong Yimo's eyes. He only looked at her and said, "The Divine Ancestor has important matters to discuss with you. This king is going to take care of other matters." There were still more than 1,000 people who were suspected to be poisoned waiting for him to deal with. Just now, the Divine Ancestor gave him some holy water. Hopefully, it would be useful. At this time, Gong Yimo finally looked at the so-called Divine Ancestor. At this time, an old woman walked out from behind him. She was standing there inconspicuously just now. Now that everyone had left, she walked shakily towards Gong Yimo. With her white hair, she gave people the feeling that she had seen the vicissitudes of life. It can't be wrong. She must be Lian Er's child. Cough, cough. After the old woman finished speaking, she coughed a few times. The Divine Ancestor hurried forward. It seemed that her status was higher than this so-called Divine Ancestor. Gong Yimo didn't deny it and bowed to her. "May I ask who the two of you are? What business do you have with me?" Hearing this, the old woman's face was suddenly filled with tears. "If you really want to know who I am to you, then you can call me grandmother." This made Gong Yimo somewhat powerless to resist, and she spoke awkwardly. "Where's the proof? How can you prove that you're related to my mother?" The Divine Ancestor was a little dissatisfied with Gong Yimo's request for proof, but the old woman stopped him and nodded with a smile. "That's exactly what I want from you. That girl Shuilian. Sigh. She's too honest. That's why so many things happened later." Chapter 363. Gong Yimo didn't care what she said. She didn't have any feelings for her mother, so naturally, She didn't care about her family. However, if she was really from the Snow Lotus clan, she would help her if she could. My mother passed away when I was very young, and she didn't say anything special to me before she passed away. So, how can I believe that you are really my grandmother? She looked like she was in a difficult position. The old woman thought for a while. Actually, it's not difficult. Our clan has a sacred stone. If you are from the Snow clan, it will definitely light up when you touch it for the first time. How could there be such a magical thing? Gong Yimo didn't believe it. However, she didn't expect the old woman to really take out a stone. The stone looked completely black. She didn't know what kind of metal it was, but it didn't look like a stone. It wasn't big, only about the length of a finger and the width of half a finger. Seeing the old woman put the stone in her palm, Gong Yimo hesitated. Would it really light up? With that thought in mind, she slowly placed her hand on the black stone. The moment her fingertips touched the strange stone, Gong Yimo felt dizzy. Then, she saw with her own eyes a faint light rise from the stone. She didn't expect it to really light up. She was shocked and quickly moved her hand away. The old woman's face showed that she knew it. She looked deeply at Gong Yimo. The passion in her eyes made Gong Yimo a little overwhelmed. Finally, I've found you. My son's only daughter who is still alive. You're actually still alive, I've finally found you. The holy ancestor Shuezhon comforted her from the side. This scene made Gong Yimo's heart slightly tangled. She had never had any concept of her past. She didn't know if this sudden birth was good or bad. Why didn't it appear in her previous life? After the old woman finished crying, she asked with red eyes, "You are called Gong Yimo, right? How can your surname be Gong? You're from the Snow clan." As she spoke, she actually cried again. That monarch of Dau is the enemy of our Shui clan. Not only did he destroy our country, he even stole your mother. We tried to save her time and time again, but the king of Dau state killed every Snow clan member he saw. So we only dared to wander around the other 3 countries, but didn't dare to go to Dau state. We didn't know that Liana really didn't kill you, and even gave birth to you. Gong Yimo looked at her crying, and Shuezhon seemed to disagree. It seemed that she should persuade the old lady. Gong Yimo suddenly said after hesitating for a while. Although it seems a little inappropriate to say this, the king of Dau state has been very good to me and my mother. I'm not his child, but as the king of a country, he didn't abort me. Although I was banished to the cold palace, he still treated me well after I left the cold palace. Although I'm not that grateful to him, I'm still grateful to him. Therefore, I will never harm him because of the grudges of the previous generation. I hope you can understand this. What did you say? Shuezhon was the first to disagree. You're acknowledging a thief as your father. Gong Yimo frowned even more. If you want to announce to the world that I'm not his child, I can leave Dau state. But do you want me to take revenge on him? What a joke. What's the reason? He destroyed Shui country and stole Shuilian, but personally, he didn't hurt me. Gong Yimo said calmly. I think that everyone is an individual. Parents don't necessarily owe their children anything. Similarly, children should be able to distinguish between right and wrong. They shouldn't just listen to what their elders say. They should have their own views of right and wrong, and not follow what others say. Shuezhon wanted to say something, but the old lady stopped him. She coughed a few times and sighed. You really think so? From what you said, you should have known your identity when you were very young. Then, even though you were in the cold palace for a few years, you didn't hate him? She lifted her eyelids with great effort, as if she didn't want to miss any expression on Gong Yimo's face. In your heart, did you not hate him? Gong Yimo didn't know why, but she suddenly thought of the grudges in her previous life. Therefore, she said with certainty, no. The old lady suddenly fell silent. At this moment, even Shuezhon fell silent. It was as if they couldn't understand Gong Yimo's words. Suddenly, the old lady laughed softly. She laughed and shook her head, as if she was laughing at herself. Yes. I'm old and confused. You're very good. Generous. My son's child should be so magnanimous. Madam. Shuezhon shouted in a low voice. However, the old lady ignored him. She held Gong Yimo's hand and said softly, "You're right. You're right. We shouldn't force you to do anything. My name is Xue Qi, and I'm your grandmother. We haven't helped you much in all these years. So, what do you want to do in the future? Let me see if there's anything I can help you with." She panted as she spoke. Gong Yimo was really afraid that she couldn't take it anymore, so she quickly said, "Don't worry. Don't worry, I can solve my own problems." The old lady smiled. "You're a good child. You solved Lu Yi's problem as soon as you came. But, what do you want to do next?" Seeing that she kept asking, Gong Yimo sighed. Anyway, there was nothing to hide, so she told her directly. "I don't want anything else. I just want the world to be peaceful and prosperous for 100 years. Her words stunned the old lady. She couldn't help but look up at Gong Yimo and said, You're a girl." "Why?" Gong Yimo smiled. "We should do what we think is meaningful in this world. Of course, whether it works or not is another matter. Don't take it too seriously." The old lady looked down to hide the complicated emotions in her eyes. After a while, she suddenly put the holy stone in Gong Yimo's hand. "Child, this. Take it." Gong Yimo was stunned. Before she could refuse, the old lady said firmly, "I'm not very capable. However, after so many years, I've accumulated a lot of connections. Ahem. Although we don't have people in Daiyu State, we have people in the other 3 countries. Now, I'll give it to you." Gong Yimo refused directly. "I can't do that. I didn't do anything. I can't take your things for free." However, the old lady's attitude was even more resolute. She looked as if she was ready to die. I'm about to die. It's God's will to give you this thing. If you don't want it, I'll kill myself here." Gong Yimo took the stone in her hand gloomily. Forget it. She would just throw it in her space. She wouldn't use the people of the Xue family. Otherwise, she would owe them a favor. Chapter 364. After sending off the strange old woman and the legendary divine ancestor, Gong Yimo threw their conversation to the back of her mind. She didn't have the slightest intention of reuniting with them. Being alone was the most free, wasn't it? She tried to throw the stone into her space, but she didn't know why. She tried several times, but this strange stone couldn't be put into her space. This surprised Gong Yimo. She could see that the things in her space were still there, but this stone was an exception. She couldn't put it in. She turned the stone in her hand a few times. She guessed that it was something special. Moreover, it represented the Snow Clan. It was the sacred stone of the Snow Clan, so it couldn't be placed anywhere. She simply hung it around her waist. By the time she returned, Gong Ju was already fast asleep on her bed. At this time, he had already washed his face. Probably because he used a lot of strength, his face was slightly red, especially around his eyes. When he was asleep, he looked very harmless. They clearly had the same eyebrows, but the look in his eyes was different. Unexpectedly, it gave her the illusion that they were 2 completely different people. He was really good-looking. When she was a child, Gong Dai would fall asleep, and she would look at him and secretly think, If she had a child in the future, it would be great if he was as beautiful as Gong Dai. Wouldn't it be pleasing to look at him every day?" Sitting on the edge of the bed, Gong Yimo suddenly remembered that Gong Dai said that he liked her. He also said that as long as she was willing, he wouldn't have a child. That way, they wouldn't have a deformed child. Gong Yimo gently smiled. How could they have a deformed child? There was no relationship between them at all. In her previous life, she had cut off all ties with the Gongche family very early on. She even changed her name. Later, it was revealed that she was the child of the original imperial concubine Xue, and her true identity was exposed. Because she had no relationship with Gong Cheng and didn't grow up in the palace, when she was together with Gong Che, no one said anything. In her previous life, she wanted to have a passionate love. In the end, it was passionate. It was passionate, but love. Gong Yimo's eyebrows suddenly darkened. She originally wanted to gently stroke Gong Dai's eyebrows, but her hand also paused in midair. She thought that she wasn't afraid of anything, but it turned out that she still had a flaw and a knot in her heart. So Gong Dai thought that there was a blood relationship between them, but only she knew that there was a knot in her heart. She didn't dare to love anyone anymore. She sighed faintly and stopped her hand in midair, not daring to touch his face. In the end, she helplessly withdrew her hand. Poor Gong Dai was usually very alert. But on Gong Yimo was the one who was close to him on the bed. Of the journey. Of the journey. And he had been traveling day and night. All day, he just, hoping to see his beloved of the journey was of the journey. Today, after receiving Gong Yimo's promise, his heart relaxed. Not only did he sleep soundly, but the corners of his lips were slightly raised as if he was having a good dream. Gong Yimo left the room. It was already dark. But she didn't want to sleep with Gong Dai. So she prepared to sleep in another room in the courtyard. But when she left the room, she saw Long Cheng Wuji standing outside hesitantly. His expression was rarely so complicated. He, who was always straightforward, was actually hesitating at the door for such a long time. Gong Yimo was afraid of waking Gong Dai up, so she signaled Long Cheng Wuji to go outside. Long Cheng Wuji had something on his mind. He didn't think that there was a man in her room. He obediently went outside with Gong Yimo. Outside, there was a wide palace road. Hua Cheng was the only real city in Lu Yi. The people here only grazed around Hua Cheng. They farmed and lived here. This city was built by Long Cheng Wuji, so it was still very young. Around it, there were people who believed in him. But today, something like this happened. There were so many people here. It was impossible to hide it. His sister and fiancé did things like slaughtering people and poisoning people. If he didn't handle it well, it was very likely that the prestige he built up over the years would collapse. It was that easy, that reality. If Hua Cheng also disbanded and became a place like a market, then Lu Yi would have no hope of becoming an emperor. So one could imagine how much pain Long Cheng Wuji was in now. He was clearly high-spirited before, wanting to achieve great things. But in one day, the people close to him gave him a bloody blow. Not only did it crush all his ambitions for the future, it also made the situation that he worked so hard for become precarious. But the first thing he did was to look for her. Gong Yimo secretly shook her head. If it was her, the first thing she would do was to appease the tribe leaders, but what she didn't expect was that this also proved that she had a place in Long Cheng Wuji's heart. Even if he wanted to kill her during the day, Long Cheng Wuji didn't stay up late. But now his spirit was dispirited. It was as if he hadn't slept for more than 10 days. He suddenly said something from the past. In the past, we said that when the grass is fertile, we would have a horse race. Since there's no time like the present, let's do it today. Gong Yimo couldn't deny it. Anyway, she was going to leave tomorrow. She didn't want to stay in this place that didn't believe in her. As for Gong Dai, she could leave first. After Gong Dai finished talking, she could catch up with him. Therefore, she nodded her head and decided to gallop on the land of Lu Yi once. Long Cheng Wuji quickly ordered people to bring 2 horses. The 2 of them didn't speak a word until they reached the entrance of Hua Cheng. Long Cheng Wuji looked into the distance and said, "If we keep going in this direction, we will reach the sacred lake. The sacred lake is especially beautiful at night. Whoever gets there first will win. The loser will have to promise the winner one thing. How about it?" Gong Yimo agreed. She didn't think that she would lose. Moreover, if Long Cheng Wuji won, he might apologize for today's matter. So if he really won, she would take it as heavens will telling her not to be calculative. Begin. The 2 horses quickly galloped out. They were both good horses, 1 in 1,000. They were very fast. Gong Yimo felt the summer night's wind blowing through her hair. She raised her head and saw a bright moon hanging in the sky. Even the stars beside it were so eye-catching. Below them was a boundless grassland. In the night wind, the grass bent and stirred up soft and bright waves. The 2 of them shuttled through it as if they were walking on waves. Their goal was the end of the starry sky. This Lu Yi's night sky was really too beautiful. But when she wasn't paying attention, Long Cheng Wuji overtook her. It was as if he couldn't see the vast night sky and the bright stars. His eyes only stared ahead, as if he was determined to win. Gong Yimo frowned slightly. Then she focused and chased after him. Long Cheng Wuji was shocked to find that Gong Yimo's riding skills were not inferior to him, a Lu Yi man who grew up on horseback. Chapter 365. Naturally, he would not know that Gong Yimo's equestrian archery skills were honed from fighting on the battlefield. He would also not know that in her previous life, the two of them had fought on this grassland. He, the son of the eagle, was not a match for the executioner. But, so what? The wind blew away all the memories. Gong Yimo believed that in this life, killing was already very far away from her. She no longer had to worry that one day she would wake up on the battlefield and sleep with a corpse as her pillow. She, who had a broad mind, seemed to have blended into the wind. She could easily feel Long Cheng Wuji's impatience, so much so that when he ran in front of her, she could see his furrowed brows. The blow he received today was too big. He was even preparing for his own wedding, but his fiancée did such a thing. Gong Yimo sighed and then slowed down. If he wanted to win, then so be it. Anyway, this Lu Yi would not be her homeland. She was about to leave, so why bother? Suddenly, a magnificent scene like the Milky Way appeared in front of Gong Yimo. In her previous life, she saw the sacred lake in the grey day. At that time, the water of the sacred lake was dyed red with blood. But in this life's night, the sacred lake she saw was like the Milky Way. It was clear and tranquil. In this kind of night, it seemed to gather all the stars, forming a sparkling Milky Way on the ground. You lost. Long Cheng Wuji's soft voice came. Gong Yimo was slightly stunned and did not regain her senses. At this moment, Long Cheng Wuji sat on the horse and silently looked at her. His eyebrows relaxed, like a silent mountain. Looking at her like this, Gong Yimo suddenly felt a trace of something called pressure. She casually spread out her hands. If you lost, then you lost. Tell me, what do you want me to do? Long Cheng Wuji jumped off the horse and extended his hand to her, as if he wanted to help her down the horse. Gong Yimo was stunned for a moment before she jumped down. She felt the slight fragrance of grass on her face. She closed her eyes comfortably and unconsciously took a few steps forward. Is it beautiful? Long Cheng Wuji's soft voice came from behind her. Here, he seemed to have shed all his sharp edges. He was like a different person compared to the angry person who wanted to kill her in the day. At this time, he pulled out a string of things from his arms. Gong Yi looked at them and found that they were all famous brands, but most of them were made of animal bones. Obviously, these were brands that were made for themselves by the common folk and were not recognized by Lu Yi. But Gong Yimo's sharp eyes saw a silver-branded item. That might be old Cha'ers. Long Cheng Wuji stepped forward. In Lu Yi, everyone's origin. Long Cheng Wuji squatted on the surface of the lake and looked at the clear lake. His heart seemed to have found peace. Those of high status can obtain life medallions here. Even the poor have to bathe here before they can be considered to have a new life. He looked at the nameplate in his hand and smiled. What you call a nameplate is your spoils of war. In Lu Yi, this is our life nameplate. Only those of high status are worthy of it. Once I was born, the elders of the clan would take my hair to the sacred ancestor. He would use our first strand of hair to make a life tablet that belongs to us. It can't be lost, it's one of a kind. That's why, we all started from here, bathing in the first drop of water in the world. At this moment, Long Cheng Wuji's voice gradually lowered as he sighed. And this is also the place where life ends. When I die, my life tablet will sink to the bottom of the lake as if it had never appeared. The only thing that proves that it was here will eventually return to the lake. Don't you think it's not worth it? He threw all the name tags in his hand into the water and stirred the water. Gong Yimo then realized that Lu Yi's name tags really glowed in the water. In other words, the dazzling starlight in the lake was not a projection of the stars, but the shining nameplates in the water. This realization made Gong Yimo slightly shocked. In this lake, who knew how many lives were hidden? Years and years of accumulation, their life's glory would finally gather here. Heroic, but short. Wasn't it not worth it? She thought of what Long Cheng Wuji asked her. Long Cheng Wuji looked at the lake and smiled. So when I was young, when I threw the Elder's Life tablets into the lake, I thought that I must create a great achievement. So that in my short life, I would not sink into the lake, but always shine. I would live in the hearts of the future generations, and pass it down generation after generation. That feeling was as if I had not only lived for a few decades, but always lived, forever living like this. Gong Yimo did not know why, but from his tone, she could hear a trace of sadness. At this moment, he had already stood up, and turned to look at Gong Yimo, and actually smiled slightly. With this thought, I always thought that my body did not belong to me. I am Lu Yi's king, so my body, consciousness, everything about me, belongs to Lu Yi, to the sky, to the people, but not to myself. What I want must be what Lu Yi wants, what Lu Yi needs is what I should do. Gong Yimo sighed, and said in a helpless tone, forget it, forget it. Don't say any more. I'm not angry with you anymore. Your situation back then. I also understand, so don't say any more. She also had this kind of heavy dream, it made people happy, but also painful, so she did not want to listen to it anymore. Long Cheng Wuji suddenly could not help but laugh. Today, I did my best to win you, even if it cost my life, not to beg for your forgiveness. Gong Yimo was angry, and stared at him. She was still angry. This person actually did not want to beg for mercy. Long Cheng Wuji looked at her. That pair of beautiful eyes, even in this kind of night, he could see a wisp of moving blue. His voice had always been calm and heavy, but at this time, it unexpectedly had a bit of a clear and cold feeling that his age should have. He said, I hope that you can stay in Lu Yi. Gong Yimo was shocked, but before she could say anything, he had already revealed his most brilliant smile since they had known each other. Those pure white teeth and slightly shining eyes softened all the corners of his face. I want to have you, this is my selfish desire, but I have my responsibilities and mission, so I can't do that. The one I should marry is Lu Yi's goddess, but today, I suddenly want to be selfish for once. I want you because I'm happy when I think of you. It has nothing to do with any benefits. It's just the true desire in my heart. It's like riding a horse in the night. My eyes can't see anything. I can only see you. Chapter 366. Gong Yimo regains her senses and shakes her head. What kind of reversal is this? She doesn't want to play with him anymore. But when she turns around, Long Cheng Wuji reaches out and grabs hold of her. He stops smiling and says seriously, I want you to stay and abandon Dai Yu State's emotional entanglements that don't belong to you. I want you to be the freest eagle in the grassland with me. I have a feeling that this is the life that suits you. Lu Yi may not be as rich as Dai Yu State, but Lu Yi is very simple. The reason why I like you is also very simple. Don't you think that you are more suited to this grassland, to this sky? Am I more suited to you? Gong Yimo retracts her hand as if she got an electric shock. She steps back. How are you suited to me? You even wanted to kill me during the day. Gong Yimo tries to push the grudge between the two. And Hua Ju Wu Yu. She is your wife. Not anymore. Long Cheng Wuji suddenly says, today, the divine ancestor came and said that she will be sentenced to death. She will use her death to comfort those who died, to redeem her sins. And when he thinks about how Hua Ju Wu Yu dared to kill the Cha clan, the anger in his body could not be suppressed no matter what. He can't wait to tear her to shreds. That won't do. Gong Yimo rejects righteously. How could Hua Ju Wu Yu die just like that? This is too strange. She frowns as she thinks. I still have a lot of things to do. I will not get married, and I will not stay in Lu Yi. Long Cheng Wuji doesn't seem to care. It's okay. I will wait for you. After you finish what you want to do, I will marry you. Or you can marry me first, and we can do what you want to do together. Gong Yimo feels that this person is really stubborn. She has to be ruthless. I already have someone I like. Who? Long Cheng Wuji raises his eyebrows. Gong Dai? Gong Yimo nodded fiercely. Since Gong Dai was sleeping, she was not afraid that he would hear. He treats me very well. I like him very much. If I want to marry, I'm willing to marry him. Long Cheng Wuji's eyes darkened, But you are brother and sister. The Emperor of Dai you state won't agree. So, I still have a chance. He said these words with great difficulty. Suddenly, he frowned and sighed. Can you not reject me? This is the first time in my life that I want to pursue something that I like. You are the first person that I like. Why is it that even Gong Dai can do it, but not me? You have no chance. Gong Dai's voice suddenly sounded, causing Gong Yimo's back to stiffen. She didn't even dare to look back. She didn't dare to think about when Gong Dai had appeared there. In the end, she still turned around. When she turned around, she saw Gong Dai standing there, panting slightly. However, his eyes were clear and there was no anger. Instead, he stepped forward possessively and protected Gong Yimo behind him. He said to Long Cheng Wuji word by word. Royal sister is mine. She has been mine since she was 7 years old. He stood in front of Gong Yimo and looked coldly at Long Cheng Wuji. He wanted to tear him apart, so, you better not have any wishful thinking. She doesn't belong to you, and definitely doesn't belong to Lu Yi. At that moment, Long Cheng Wuji's immature aura disappeared. The calm and domineering King Lu Yi returned. He narrowed his deep eyes and looked at Gong Dai with undisguised murderous intent. You can't keep her. She is an eagle, not a house sparrow in Dai Yu state. Gong Dai looked at him coldly. He didn't back down at all. It's still better than you, Lu Yi. You have nothing. You. Long Cheng Wuji was like a tiger whose whiskers had been plucked. He glared at Gong Dai and wanted to fight him. You are the one who is wishful thinking. She has done so much for you. You should be grateful. Not let her fall into incestuousness and be in a dilemma. This was the most painful thorn in Gong Dai's heart. His body suddenly exploded with a murderous aura. Gong Yimo, who was behind him, was scared and wanted to retreat. She is my woman. Anyone who wants to snatch her away, I will not let them off. Long Cheng Wuji had already taken up his stance. He stared at Gong Dai like a beast staring at its prey. Then let's fight. In the grasslands, only the strong can capture a woman's heart. Gong Dai's murderous aura could not be suppressed. Gong Yimo felt that Long Cheng Wuji was already very pitiful today. She hoped that Gong Dai would not be too ruthless. However, when she pulled on Gong Dai's sleeve, he turned around and hugged her. He gave her a fierce kiss. You always cause trouble when I'm not paying attention. Royal sister, I will deal with you later. His eyes were filled with a certain kind of heat. Gong Yimo did not dare to say anything. She stood there in a daze. Long Cheng Wuji had already rushed over angrily. Gong Dai was also happy to fight. He had been unhappy with Long Cheng Wuji for a long time. Seeing the two of them fighting because of a disagreement, Gong Yimo wanted to cry. What was going on? Why couldn't they just talk things out? The two of them did not use any weapons. They were fighting barehanded. It was more like they were venting their anger. Gong Dai, how old are you? Can you guarantee that you will not fall in love with someone else in the future? When the time comes, what will she do? Gong Dai directly punched his face and sneered, You are very good. Your fiancé is just about to be executed and you can't wait to find another woman. Is someone like you very reliable? In terms of poisonous tongue, Gong Dai was almost invincible. Long Cheng Wuji was about to explode in anger. When he mentioned flower boat Wuyo, he remembered what happened today. Then, he vented all his anger on Gong Dai. He swung his palm. Because of his innate strength, Gong Dai retreated a few steps. His blood and qi were in turmoil. He exerted force on his feet and stopped his body from retreating. Looking at Long Cheng Wuji, his eyes surged and he fiercely counterattacked. You are a despicable person. Other than taking advantage of her soft-heartedness and her past feelings, do you dare to use your strength to conquer her? Long Cheng Wuji took a punch from Gong Dai and retreated a few steps. He almost vomited blood. However, he held it in and gritted his teeth. Gong Dai stood there looking at him with disdain. A person who can't even take care of a woman's little sister has no right to say such words. Royal sister said that you should cultivate yourself and take care of the family. You have not done a single thing well. Ah, damn it. I will kill you. Long Cheng Wuji's eyes instantly turned red. Gong Dai sneered. He clenched his fist and was ready to give him a quick death. Enough. Gong Yimo's face was gloomy. She held her forehead with one hand and angrily shouted. Hearing that she was angry, the two of them stopped. However, although Long Cheng Wuji's strength was great, he was not Gong Dai's opponent. In the end, he was knocked down to the ground by Gong Dai. He felt that he had been humiliated. He looked at Gong Dai and wished he could cut him into pieces. What are you guys doing? Gong Yimo first stared at Gong Dai and used her finger to poke his chest. Did you forget why you came to Lu Yi? He is the king of Lu Yi. You really hit him? Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo with a fierce gaze. Royal sister was attracting love again. He had not been pacified yet. Chapter 367. Gong Yimo was frightened by his stare and became discouraged. She then glared at Long Cheng Wuji. And you? Gong Dai is right. You should deal with your women first. Moreover, you still have work to do tomorrow. Can you not have those weird thoughts? Long Cheng Wuji was not convinced. Gong Yimo, I must have you. Gong Dai's killing intent exploded as he narrowed his eyes and walked towards Long Cheng Wuji. At that moment, Gong Yimo really felt that Gong Dai was going to kill her, so Gong Yimo held on tightly to Gong Dai and cried, Ancestor. You are all ancestors, okay? I'm so tired. I want to go back and rest. Gong Dai thought that it would not be too late to go back and rest after killing Long Cheng Wuji, but Gong Yimo suddenly let go and angrily stomped her foot. Forget it. You guys can play around. I don't care anymore. Don't follow me. Saying that, she got on her horse and ran away. Seeing Gong Yimo leave just like that, Gong Dai was worried that she would not continue to tangle with Long Cheng Wuji. So he directly got on another horse and ran towards Gong Yimo. Poor Lu Yi King was left alone by the sacred lake. He did not regain his senses for a long time and finally clenched his teeth. Gong Dai. He did not believe that he could not win against a 17-year-old brat. The night wind blew on Gong Yimo's somewhat hot face. Just now when Gong Dai kissed her forcefully, her whole body was burning up and she did not dare to face him. But Gong Dai actually caught up from behind. Although she did not turn around, Gong Yimo knew that it must be Gong Dai. Scary. Didn't he want to fight? Thinking of this, she hurriedly used her best riding skills to rush forward. She couldn't let Gong Dai catch up to her. Gong Dai's equestrian skills were also very good, but there was still some distance between him and Gong Yimo. At this moment, he saw that no matter how he chased, he was still a horse's length away from Gong Yimo. He pursed his lips and smiled. Royal sister, if you don't stop, I'm going to jump over. Gong Yimo heard his voice transmitted through his inner energy. Every word seemed to contain some kind of smile, which made her face burn even more. She wanted to run even faster. I'll count to 3 and jump over. Gong Dai's cold voice sounded again with a hint of laughter. Gong Yimo did not believe him at all. She was running so fast. Gong Dai would only do this if he didn't want his life anymore, because he couldn't jump on her horse. If he really did, he would definitely fall off the horse. Anyway, he was so strong that he wouldn't die from the fall. She wouldn't be soft-hearted. Perhaps he was deliberately scaring her to make her stop. 1. Gong Yimo hesitated for a moment. Should she slow down? If he didn't die from the fall, it would be troublesome if he broke his leg or something. 3. Gong Yimo was shocked and subconsciously pulled the reins tightly. The horse under her ran forward a few steps due to inertia before it raised its front hooves and almost flipped Gong Yimo over. Gong Dai's horse quickly brushed past her horse. Gong Dai was no longer on it. Did he really jump? Before she came to a stop, she quickly turned back to see how Gong Dai was doing. She felt warmth behind her. In this situation, Gong Dai successfully landed on her horse and hugged her. The horse had just stopped, so Gong Dai kicked it with his leg and it started to slowly move forward. This process was too thrilling. Gong Dai almost fell off the horse if she didn't pull the reins in time. Gong Yimo panted slightly and patted her chest. Her little heart was beating very fast. After calming down a little, she turned back angrily and pinched Gong Dai's waist. Where's 2? Did you eat 2? How can you shout 1 and then 3? You did it on purpose. You scared me to death. Gong Dai took advantage of her inattention and flipped her around so that she was facing him. Gong Yimo didn't realize what was happening, but Gong Dai had already grabbed her hand tightly. She looked up and almost drowned in his bright black eyes. I did it on purpose because I knew that you would definitely catch me. You said that you like me. How can you bear to let me fall to my death? Gong Yimo couldn't help but stare at him. You deserve to fall to your death. This bastard. However, Gong Ju's big hand pressed down on her back, and her whole body fell onto his chest. Her small mouth was fiercely sucked into Gong Ju's mouth. He hugged her very passionately, and his kiss almost melted her in an instant. Their heartbeats hadn't even calmed down when they started to pound even harder. Gong Yimo felt like she was falling into a fog. Her wide eyes blinked blankly, and Gong Dai took the opportunity to deepen the kiss. The two of them kissed while sitting on the horse in such an embarrassing position. Under the moonlight, in the wilderness, it was really too shameless. Gong Yimo's face turned red. It was such a hot position, and the most important thing was that the horse was still moving. It was so embarrassing. She quickly backed away and glared fiercely at Gong Dai. Fortunately, there was no one around. Otherwise, her reputation as the eldest princess of Dai Yu State's Jiyu country would be completely disgraced by Gong Dai. Can you stop messing around? Can you restrain yourself a little? She poked Gong Dai with her tender finger and tried to persuade him with a helpless expression. Gong Dai laughed. His voice was clear and sounded a little cold in the night, but more importantly, it sounded happy. I can't restrain myself. He actually dared to shake his head and stared at Gong Yimo. Royal sister is so dazzling. Wherever she goes, she attracts a group of wild bees and butterflies. If I restrain myself, the royal sister will be snatched away. His words didn't sound like he was wronged. Gong Yimo lowered her head in shame and tried to quibble. They're probably blinded by my intelligence, so they're using this method to keep me. Actually, I think this is a conspiracy. Gong Dai nodded repeatedly. Yes, they're all fake, but I'm real. He would never let go of any opportunity to elevate himself and suppress his opponents. Gong Yimo rolled her eyes. So, don't be so possessive. Gong Dai hugged her tightly again. He told her firmly, I won't. But his face was filled with happiness and helplessness. His royal sister would never know how dazzling she was. Those men had really fallen in love with her. How annoying. It was still better to be in the cold palace. He didn't have to worry about those prying eyes. But now, not only did he have to worry about blood relations, he also had to deal with opponents from all directions. He had to be strong. Yes, he had found another excellent reason for himself to work hard. The night was as cool as water. There were stars and wind. The two of them walked slowly like this. When they reached Lu Yi, Gong Yimo was already sound asleep. It couldn't be helped. After all the torment today, she was already mentally and physically exhausted. So, she fell asleep in Gong Dai's arms. Gong Dai planted a kiss on her forehead. Very good, let's continue like this. He felt that he was about to succeed. Chapter 368. The next day, Gong Yimo was woken up by the noise outside. When she woke up, she saw Gong Dai sitting by the bed with a cold expression. He smiled when he saw Gong Yimo wake up. Royal sister, why don't you sleep a little longer? Gong Yimo rubbed her eyes. Why is it so noisy outside? She wanted to get up, but Gong Dai pressed her down and said in a serious tone, sleep a little longer, it's still early. Gong Yimo felt that it was a little strange. At this moment, an angry female voice came from outside. Gong Yimo, you're so cruel. They were coming for her. Gong Dai secretly frowned. If it wasn't for the fact that it wasn't good to cause trouble in Lu Yi's palace, he really wanted to throw those people out. What was Dragon City Everlasting doing? He just went out to kill someone. Why wasn't he done yet? Gong Yimo couldn't lie down anymore and wanted to go out to take a look. Gong Dai said unhappily, don't bother, this is Lu Yi's matter, it has nothing to do with us. Gong Yimo pouted, we can't just stay in the room and ignore her because of her noise, right? As she said that, she got up to take a look. Gong Dai had no choice but to follow. Although he had been accompanying royal sister, it wasn't like he didn't hear the noise outside. He understood that some people were unnecessary. The more you paid attention to them, the happier they would be. Gong Dai summoned a person and ordered the imperial guards to send 100 people to wait for orders. Then, he followed. Gong Dai's action was inappropriate and could even be considered a provocation. But who asked Dragon City Everlasting to be so useless? He said that he was going to execute Flower Boat Warrelis, but he still hadn't returned and wanted him to do it himself. When Gong Yimo went out, she saw a group of women. The strange thing was, just as she was wondering why Dragon City Everlasting wasn't around, she remembered that Dragon City Everlasting had sent someone to inform her that he was going to execute Flower Boat Warrelis with the people from the Sacred Lake. But as soon as he left the palace, these people came in. They were too careless. Gong Yimo thought that it might be a certain little mouse that was unwilling to give up and wanted to let someone in to find trouble with her. The moment they saw Gong Yimo come out, the group of women rushed forward like crazy, as if they wanted to force her back. The leader's hand almost grabbed Gong Dai, but she was kicked away by Gong Dai. He didn't have a principle of not hitting women. There was only a difference between those who deserved to be hit and those who shouldn't. He used a bit of strength in his kick, and a large number of people behind him fell down in order to catch the girl. This was also good. Gong Yimo did not want to fight with these people. At this moment, there were only a few guards in front of her courtyard. The others had probably been transferred away. Gong Yimo couldn't help but sigh. Long Cheng's Ting Shui and the others were really forcing her to not let them off. The groaning on the ground turned into curses. Before they could get up, Gong Dai's people had already rushed in and instantly blocked the entire courtyard. Someone even brought chairs for Gong Yimo and Gong Dai to sit down and talk. She sighed. "All right, now can someone tell me what's going on? Why are you making so much noise?" Gong Dai's imperial guards separated the people one by one. Those women wearing Lu Yi's clothes stared at Gong Yimo but couldn't move. One of them said angrily, "Goddess is going to be killed by you. You can still sleep. Do you still have a conscience?" Gong Yimo couldn't understand her logic and simply ignored her. She only looked at the woman who had been kicked down by Gong Dai. The corners of her mouth were stained with blood, but the way she glared at Gong Yimo was as if she wanted to eat her up. "You will suffer retribution." Gong Yimo looked at her eyebrows that were similar to Hua Ju Wuyo's and suddenly realized, "You're Hua Ju Wuyo's mother?" In Lu Yi, there was no distinction between the legitimate wife and concubine. Generally, they were separated by seniority. Hua Ju Wuyo was ranked 4th and was born from a concubine. She asked in puzzlement, "Why are you looking for me? People who do bad things will naturally suffer retribution, but I didn't do anything bad, so I'm sitting here perfectly fine." "Did you find the wrong person?" "Bah," she said fiercely, "all of this was clearly set up by you. Wuyo is such a kind child, how could she do such a thing? You vicious woman. You must be eyeing the position of princess consort, so you set Wuyo up like this. Bitch, you'll die a horrible death." Before Gong Yimo could say anything, Gong Dai's cold gaze landed on her. Before she could say anything, an imperial guard immediately came forward to slap her. That strength was clearly not treating her as a woman. The other women who came along didn't dare to speak, afraid that they would be treated the same way. Gong Dai sneered and said to Gong Yimo, "Royal sister, Lu Yi's palace is so unruly. You're not worthy to talk to such people." Gong Yimo narrowed her eyes and sized them up. She suddenly asked, "How long have they been making a scene here?" "Almost the entire morning." Gong Dai didn't pay much attention to it. Gong Yimo turned back to look. They excitedly came here and made a scene for the entire morning, but they didn't dare to enter the door. Originally, there were only 2 guards in front of the door. She frowned. "These people seem to be deliberately looking for trouble, hoping to make me shut the door and not come out. From the looks of it, something must have happened outside." Gong Dai casually grunted. Whether something happened to Lu Yi or not had nothing to do with him. Anyway, with him here, even if Lu Yi overturned the heavens, he wouldn't be able to hurt Gong Yimo in the slightest. Unexpectedly, Lu Yi really wanted to overturn the heavens. Amidst the flames, Flower Boat Wuyo was tied to the firewood building. She looked down at the commoners who were looking at her with indignant expressions. In the next moment, she was going to be burned to death. But strangely, there was no fear on her face. Instead, she looked at the people with a compassionate expression, as if she was wronged and was going to die unjustly. Longcheng Wuji knelt on the high platform in front of the Eagle Deity Temple. At this time, his back was exposed, and there were traces of being whipped. At this time, the whip was passed to the hands of an old man. He was one of the leaders of the Hua Cheng tribes. Originally, after experiencing yesterday's farce, he had thought of leaving Hua Cheng. But today, other than executing the heinous crime of Flower Boat Wuyo, Longcheng Wuji also knelt down to apologize to the Eagle Deity. Moreover, on the high platform in front of the Eagle Deity Temple, he let the other leaders of the tribes who had sided with him whip him to atone for their sins. The old man sighed. In the end, the whip couldn't fall down. He knelt down, and when he knelt, all the other leaders knelt down as well. King, this isn't your fault. Even if it is your fault, we have seen your sincerity. We won't blame you. You are still the hope of all the leaders of the tribes. Please get up. Longcheng Wuji lowered his head and said guiltily, No, I have failed to live up to your expectations. One was his fiancée, the other was his sister. He couldn't absolve himself from the blame. The old man sighed and stood up to help Longcheng Wuji up. I, Lu Yi's eagle son, shouldn't be so weak. Since you know you are wrong, you should go and correct your mistakes. As he said that, he passed a torch to Longcheng Wuji and pointed at Flower Boat Wuyo. The old man's face was filled with resentment. Now, you should go and burn her to death. Chapter 369. Burn her to death. Burn Hua Ju Wuyu, burn her to death. Hearing the angry voices of the crowd, Longcheng Wuji tightened his grip on the torch and walked towards Hua Ju Wuyu. Brother Wuji, are you really going to burn me to death? Hua Ju Wuyu's eyes were filled with tears. Longcheng Wuji nodded coldly. This was the Sacred Lake's request. If it was him, he wouldn't kill Hua Ju Wuyu. At most he would send her to Paluo Mountain to cultivate, never to leave the mountain. After all, Hua Ju Wuyu was guilty. As her fiancé, he didn't notice her abnormality, he was even more guilty. However, Flower Boat Warrelis was the goddess of the Holy Lake. The Holy Lake had the right to punish her. Now that the Holy Lake wanted to burn Flower Boat Warrelis to death, Dragon City Everlasting had begged for mercy, but the Holy Ancestor had insisted. Seeing him nod, Hua Ju Wuyu's face gradually twisted. Then why don't you burn your sister to death? She was also involved in this matter. Why do I have to die? But she can marry someone else. Longcheng Wuji said softly, this is the Sacred Lake's intention. Sacred Lake. Hua Ju Wuyu suddenly gritted her teeth. That old fart, he isn't even one of Lu Yi's people. Now that he has inherited Lu Yi's Sacred Lake, it's fine if he doesn't help Lu Yi's people. But because of that slut Gong Yimo, he's treating me like this. When Longcheng Wuji heard this, he felt that there was something going on. But before he could ask, Hua Ju Wuyu's face suddenly changed. Since that's the case, then all of you can die. All of you can die. Following her words, countless troops surged out from all directions, surrounding the entire Eagle God Temple's plaza. The entire place was in a state of panic, and only Hua Ju Wuyo was laughing loudly. If you want me to die, then all of you can die first. Her gaze landed in a corner, revealing an aggrieved expression. Brother, save me. Longcheng Wuji looked over, then squeezed out a few words. Hua Ju Jinyang. You dare to betray me. Hua Ju Jinyang, Lu Yi's great general who never missed his target. Gong Yimo had suffered in his hands before. At this moment, his face was still covered in a beard, and his expression was resolute as he spoke. I can't watch you burn Warrelis to death. The moment he returned, he heard the news. Flower Boat Warrelis was his most cherished younger sister. He could not let her die. Longcheng Wuji was furious. So you betrayed me for a woman? Good, very good. Hua Ju Jinyang did not dare to look at Longcheng Wuji's face. Once the Hua Ju family betrayed them, Longcheng Wuji would be in a very passive position. This was because 1/3 of Longcheng Wuji's power had been given to Hua Ju Jinyang, and with the addition of the Hua Ju family, Longcheng Wuji would be in a very passive position. Hua Ju Wuyo sneered. She looked at Long Cheng Wuji with eyes full of pity. Who told you to treat me like this? Cousin, don't worry, I won't kill you. I still want to marry you. At the same time, although she was still tied to the woodshed, her eyes were filled with undisguised killing intent as she looked at the panicked crowd below. But you people actually dared to disrespect me. You will all die. You will all die. Sister. Hua Ju Jinyang shouted. Just as he was about to save her, Long Cheng Wuji laughed. Baiji Ziren, are you still not coming out? With a light cough, a young man in white walked out calmly. He was not dressed like Lu Yi, but in the Central Plains. However, everyone present was shocked when they saw him. In a short period of time, no one could mobilize too many troops. For example, Hua Cheng had 8,000 troops. 3,000 of them were given to Hua Ju Jinyang, while Long Cheng Wuji had 5,000. However, with the Hua Ju family's betrayal, there were many warriors in the Hua Ju tribe. Even if time was tight, there were still 4,000 to 5,000 people. Therefore, they had the advantage in numbers. If they really caught Long Cheng Wuji off guard and killed him and the leaders of the Hua Cheng tribe here, their rebellion would be considered a success. But now there was Baiji Ziren. Who knew how many warriors from the Baiji family he had brought with him? After a moment of panic, Hua Ju Jinyang said in a low voice, "My people have sealed off the city roads. Even if Baiji's people sneak in, there will be no more than 2,000 of them. King, you should admit defeat. I have more people than you, and all of them are brave and good at fighting," he analyzed calmly. Although time was tight and he did not expect Long Cheng Wuji to be on guard, they still had a slight advantage. Then, what if I join in? At this time, Gong Yimo walked over with a smile. She was tall, but what was more obvious was the 2,000 imperial guards behind her who were emitting a murderous aura. This made Hua Ju Jinyang frown. He felt that his father was really incompetent. Didn't he say that he would force Gong Yimo to not appear? Why did she still come? In fact, he had really wronged his father. If they fought, he would not be able to win against Gong Dai and the Imperial Guards. If they exchanged benefits, he was not willing to do that to Gong Yimo, who had harmed them. Therefore, he did something stupid. He thought that Gong Yimo would not make things difficult for some weak women and children, which led to the scene in the morning. His thinking was right. However, Gong Yimo would not harm women and children, but Gong Dai did not have such principles. Long Cheng Wuji's eyes lit up when he saw Gong Yimo. The atmosphere at the scene became strange again. Hua Ju Wuyo was a little scared. He glanced at his brother, and finally turned to Gong Ju and said, "Gong Ju. Gong Dai, are you really going to help Long Cheng Wuji? He has his eyes on your sweetheart." Gong Dai turned a deaf ear. He could not be bothered to talk to such a person. Seeing that Gong Dai could not get through, Hua Ju Wuyo gritted her teeth and said to Gong Yimo, "Gong Yimo, a straightforward person does not resort to insinuations. I was wrong before, but as long as you help me, I promise that I will give you a generous reward." Gong Yimo did not expect the situation to take such a turn. Her eyes lit up and she hurriedly asked, "How generous?" Long Cheng Wuji was almost angered to death when he saw Gong Yimo's greedy look. What she could give, he could not. Hua Ju Wuyo did not expect Gong Yimo to be so straightforward. She frowned. Hua Ju Jinyang looked at the girl who almost died in his hands and said in a low voice, "Help me. When I become a king, I will marry you." When he said that, before Gong Yimo could vomit blood, Gong Dai looked over with a murderous gaze. He knew that Lu Yi was not a good person, and each of them was delusional. Shoo shoo shoo. Who cares? Gong Yimo wrinkled her little nose. "Give me some real benefits." At this moment, Long Cheng Wuji spoke. His tone was very serious. "Gong Yimo, as long as you help me get rid of them, I, Lu Yi, will provide all the horses that the Three Kingdoms Horse Club need." Gong Yimo nodded repeatedly. Hua Ju Jinyang panicked. "If you help the Hua Ju family, I am willing to give 3 Lu Yi border cities to Dai Yu State." As soon as he said this, Long Cheng Wuji immediately roared, "Hua Ju, watch your word. You are betraying your country." Hua Ju Jinyang ignored him. He only looked at Gong Yimo with a heavy gaze. In the face of great benefits, Gong Yimo should know how to choose. He knew very well that in the face of absolute benefits, all alliances could be destroyed. Gong Yimo opened her little mouth and looked at everyone in shock. She had only said it casually. Why did they all take it seriously? At this time, Gong Ju suddenly spoke. He smiled at Long Cheng Wuji and said in a quiet tone, I will add one more condition. As long as you can swear that you will never covet royal sister again, I will help you. Chapter 370. His eyes were cold as he asked in a serious tone. Deal? When he said that, Gong Yimo and Long Cheng Wuji were stunned. Gong Yimo sighed. Could he not make such a request at such a serious moment? She felt everyone's eyes on her. No matter how thick-skinned she was, she felt embarrassed. But Gong Yimo was the only one who thought that Gong Dai was joking. Everyone present could tell that he was serious. Gong Dai was not a person who could be judged purely by good or bad. If he did not agree, no one knew what he would do. Everyone thought that Long Cheng Wuji would agree easily. Gong Dai was an unpredictable person. If he did not agree, what if Gong Dai really helped Hua Ju's family? Originally, it was fine if Gong Dai's people did not appear. Long Cheng Wuji felt that he might not lose. But now that he appeared, things became troublesome. You don't agree? Gong Dai raised his eyebrows slightly. That threatening tone of his made the entire place fall into a strange silence. Long Cheng Wuji gritted his teeth. Gong Dai, you're too despicable. Is that so? Gong Dai reached out and stroked Gong Yimo's hair. He smiled. Letting go of one person and gaining a country. You've profited, haven't you? His cold voice reverberated in the square. Gong Yimo looked at him blankly. She suddenly understood Gong Dai's intentions. He wanted to prove to her that these men were not worth her time. Everyone knew which to choose between a person and a country. But he, Gong Dai, was different. He was the kind of person who would give up a country for one person. Only he could do that. Long Cheng Wuji lost. If he was a person, he would be willing to give up a country and choose Gong Yimo. But he was King Lu Yi. His people were trembling in the corners of the square. So, he could not do that. At that moment, Long Cheng Wuji did not dare to look Gong Yimo in the eyes. He only looked at Gong Dai. Finally, he lowered his head in grief and indignation. He coldly made a gesture. Then, thank you, Prince Chi of Dai Yu State, for your help. These few words were said in a depressed, angry, and helpless tone. He never knew that he could be so emotional. Gong Ju's lips curved into a smile, and he nodded with satisfaction. No need to be so polite. Gong Yimo watched them come to an agreement. And was speechless. But she did not want to have any emotional entanglements with others, so she did not say anything. Seeing that Gong Dai and Long Cheng Wuji had formed an alliance was very disadvantageous for the Huaju family. But a rebellion was a rebellion. Now that they were riding a tiger, they could not back down. It was better to fight. Coincidentally, he, Huaju Jinyang, was also looking forward to a fight with Gong Dai. The people from both sides kept pouring into the square from two different directions and started to fight. Gong Yimo originally wanted to join in. But as soon as she drew her sword, Gong Dai frowned slightly. In the midst of the chaotic battle, he carried Gong Yimo up to the wooden house like a fragile porcelain doll. This is a man's business. Royal sister, just watch. With that, he jumped down himself and joined in the fight, tangling with Hua Ju Jinyang. Gong Yimo was still a little stunned when he put her up to the wooden house. Whether it was in her previous life or this life, she was used to charging and breaking through enemy lines. She was used to doing everything herself and fighting at the forefront. But Gong Dai's actions made her feel like she was being protected, as if she was powerless and only needed to watch. She did not know why, but this feeling was not bad. Below, there were sounds of fighting. The people in front had fallen, but there was still a steady stream of people pouring into the square. Gong Yimo looked at these people fighting and did not feel anything. After all, she had seen many of them. And many things were not as simple as they seemed on the surface. The root of the problem seemed simple, as if it could be solved just by sitting down and talking. But in reality, The reason for the current situation was because of hidden dangers that had been buried a long time ago. That was why there would be a day when it would explode. It was not just on the surface. She did not understand Lu Yi's situation, but the way the Huiju family wanted to monopolize the horse ranch must have crossed Long Cheng Wuji's bottom line from the beginning. It was just that he had held back. And Long Cheng Wuji was already prepared. He had notified the Baiji family in advance to help. Clearly, the tripartite situation of the three big families had collapsed. From this point, it could be seen that the simple Lu Yi had a complicated side that was not inferior to the Daiyu state. It was too noisy below. Gong Yimo turned to look at Huiju Wuyo, who was still tied up on the dugger. She touched her chin and said, "You did not die in vain. So many people will be buried with you." But at this moment, Huiju Wuyo was not calm at all. She stared at the battle below anxiously. She did not have the calmness that Gong Yimo had. The smell of blood and the sounds of fighting were the most provocative. It could also make people nervous or excited. Huiju Wuyo was very nervous. Her face was pale and her forehead was covered in cold sweat. "I don't want to die. I won't die. The warriors of the Huiju family will not lose. I don't want to die." But as she said this, she saw with her own eyes that someone she knew from the Huiju family was killed by the Baiji family. She could not help but scream. It was as if the knife was cutting her. Blood splattered 3 feet. Gong Yimo saw this and could almost feel the heat of the blood. In the past, she had been fighting in close combat. This was the most familiar feeling. But now, she was sitting here without any blood. She was not used to it. No, the Huiju family will lose. Gong Yimo analyzed the situation coldly. Although the Huiju family was very brave and had more people than the Baiji family and Long Cheng family, they had Gong Dai. Even if the people he trained were few, they would still have an overwhelming advantage at this moment. Not to mention the endless stream of people who came to protect them. Without the advantage of being caught off guard and having the advantage of numbers, the Huiju family was destined to lose. At this moment, Huiju Wuyo also looked at the place where Gong Dai and the others were. There was almost a vacuum there. Her eyes turned red and she was speechless for a long time. "You are really lucky." After a while, Gong Yimo heard Huiju Wuyo's voice. "Gong Dai loves you so much and there are so many people protecting you. I still remember how Gong Dai forced the shop owner's family to be on guard in the middle of the night so that you could eat a sweet biscuit that you liked." Gong Yimo was stunned. She did not remember what Huiju Wuyo was talking about. That incident was actually the first time Huiju Wuyo was caught by Gong Dai. She was jealous of Gong Yimo. But, wasn't this jealousy also a form of envy? Huiju Wuyo cried when she saw that the Huiju family was gradually defeated. Her brother's bloodthirsty eyes could not save them. She suddenly regretted doing such a thing for her own selfish reasons. The Huiju family's rebellion was premeditated by her father. But her brother's rebellion was really for her sake. Chapter 371. But now, seeing that the Huiju family was on the verge of collapse, she could not say a word to persuade them. Actually, if she said one word, her brother would definitely listen to her. Surrendering was better than so many people dying. But she just could not say it. She was afraid of death. Long Cheng Wuji and the rest gradually gained control of the situation. Under the overwhelming advantage, many of the Huiju family members surrendered. Huiju Jinyan's thigh was cut and he could not stand up again. Long Cheng Wuji panted slightly, then sent a team to the Huiju family to clean up the remnants. Looking at the corpses on the ground, Huiju Wuyo could not help but burst into tears. She looked at Gong Yimo with hatred. "This is all your fault. If not for you, I would still be a goddess. Perhaps I would have become a princess. Why did you do this to me?" Sometimes, people were so strange. She did not think about what she had done or how many people she had killed. She only felt that she had been forced to this point by others. But was it really because others had forced her? It was her own choice. Gong Yimo jumped down from the firewood tower. At this moment, around the square, the weak clansmen were hiding in the corners, looking over. They watched as Gong Yimo took out a fire starter and looked calmly at Huiju Wuyo. You should ask the king of hell this question. Huaju Jinyang saw this and his eyes almost popped out of their socket. But because of his serious injuries, he could not move. He only had time to scream, Wuyo. But no matter how unwilling, sorrowful, and angry he was, the fire starter fell on the firewood that had been drenched in oil. It jumped and rolled down, but the flames immediately rose. Huaju Wuyo screamed. There were so many dead people on the ground, and those kneeling on the ground. Not a single one of them came to save her. Gong Yimo, you will die a horrible death. She looked at all this in horror, screaming and cursing. The moment the heatwave hit, death approached. At that moment, she broke down. Gong Yimo glanced at her, then turned around and walked towards Huaju Jinyang with a smile. Huaju Jinyang's thigh had been cut and he could not move at all. He could only crawl towards the fire, shouting no continuously. Worryless. Being burned to death was very painful. That kind of burning pain seemed to slowly burn one's soul. Gong Yimo picked up a bow and arrow, then stood in front of Huaju Jinyang. He looked up blankly. Last time, he had almost killed this woman with an arrow, but it had only been a short time. This woman had grown to such a level. She held such a high position and wielded so much power that she could decide the outcome of a country. As for him, he was lying on the ground like a dog, looking up at him. Gong Yimo threw the bow in front of him. Pick it up. As she said this, Huaju Wuyo's screams came from behind her. The fire had already reached her skirt. Her panicked and terrified voice deeply touched the nerves of everyone in the square. There was a burning smell in the air. She kept cursing Gong Yimo. It was all her fault. She did not want to die. She did not want to be burned to death. If you don't want to see your sister die so painfully, you have another choice. Pick up the bow and use your superb archery skills to give her a quick death. Gong Yimo looked at Huaju Jinyang with a smile. At this moment, she was like a demon, but the corners of her lips curled up slightly. She was clearly demonic, but there was no evil in her at all. She wanted him to kill his sister. No, he could not. Huaju Jinyang pushed the bow and arrow away, but Huaju Wuyo's painful screams made him hesitate. He had to save her. Save her. Not kill her. Gong Yimo. You will die a horrible death. Ah, you will die a horrible death. Thousands of arrows will pierce your heart. You will be torn apart by 5 horses. Gong Yimo heard the curses behind her and the crackling of the firewood. She opened her eyes and revealed her white teeth. She made a gesture towards Huaju Jinyang, which was to reach out and swipe her throat. She had done this gesture to Huaju Jinyang when she had escaped from his arrow. As long as you can pierce her throat with 1 arrow, then she will die immediately. She will not have to suffer the pain of being burned by the fire. Also, as long as you don't miss, I promise you that I will bury her ashes in your Huaju family's graveyard, and no one will care about it. As long as you shoot her throat. Huaju Jinyang looked at Gong Yimo in disbelief. However, he did not see anything on Gong Yimo's face. She was taking revenge for the 2 arrows from back then. She was forcing him to kill the person that he would rather rebel to protect. The screams continued, and the fire made the entire place hot. No one spoke, and no one stopped her. She was just so unscrupulous as she asked him to do this. However, when she said these words, there was not a trace of cruelty in her expression. Instead, there was pity, as if she was forgiving. Wasn't that pity and forgiveness? Huaju Wuyo's screams became more and more pitiful. The fire burned her skin, and she wished she could die immediately. Ah! Gong Yimo. I curse you, curse you. She cried and laughed, cursing like a crazy demon. Her painful screams finally made Huaju Jinyang grab the bow and arrow. Gong Yimo saw that he had grabbed the bow and arrow. She smiled and moved aside, allowing him to see his sister's pitiful state. The fire burned Huaju Jinyang's dress and burned her body. It could be said that she was begging for death. Huaju Jinyang's hand that was holding the bow and arrow was trembling. He hated how these people could be so cruel. His sister was arrogant, noble, and beautiful. She should not be burned in the fire, forcing him to kill her personally to end the pain. Why was it that the one dying was not someone else? Gong Yimo saw the hatred in his eyes. Her ghostly voice instantly dispelled all of Hua Jujinyan's thoughts. You have to think carefully. There's only one arrow. If you use it to shoot someone else, then you can watch Hua Ju Wuyo burn to death. It's that simple. Her words made Hua Jujinyan's heart turn to ashes. He sat on the ground. On one side was his screaming sister, and on the other was the person he wanted to kill the most. At such a close distance, he could directly kill Longcheng Wuji, or kill Gong Yimo. But the fire had already burned Hua Ju Wuyo. If he killed these people, then Hua Ju Wuyo would welcome her most tragic death, revenge, or to give his sister relief. He had never felt that the bow in his hand was so heavy. He finally aimed at Hua Ju Wuyo's neck. At this moment, Hua Ju Wuyo was in extreme pain, her resentful eyes entangled with Gong Yimo. Her eyes were bleeding. Every word was like the most vicious curse from the depths of hell. Gong Yimo, I use my life to curse you. You will be betrayed by the person you love the most. You will suffer the most extreme punishment in the world until you die. You will never be reincarnated. After saying this, her head suddenly tilted back. Her upper body was nailed to the wooden stake behind her by her own brother with an arrow. She died with her eyes wide open, but she no longer had to endure the pain of being burned by the fire. This was good, very good. Gong Yimo saw Hua Jujinyan's bow fall to the ground. His hands were trembling. She could not help but smile. This arrow had actually killed two people. Hua Ju Wuyo and himself. There would no longer be a master archer, Hua Jujinyang. She had avenged the two arrows from back then. Wasn't this all very convenient? Chapter 372. With Hua Ju Wuyo's death, this matter was settled. What Lu Yi did next had nothing to do with her. She could prepare to go back. However, Gong Dai refused to let her go. He insisted that she stay and go with him. In Gong Dai's eyes, the royal sister was too jumpy. He had to keep an eye on her. Gong Yimo stayed with resentment. She had no choice. She had to watch Longcheng Ting Shui get married. In order to appease the people, Longcheng Wuji had to cut the Gordian knot and let Longcheng Ting Shui get married as soon as possible. Otherwise, once the matter was settled, Longcheng Ting Shui would have to suffer. Therefore, no matter how reluctant they were, the old Lu Yi king and the old Wang Fei were beaten by Longcheng Wuji. They became well-behaved and began to prepare a dowry for Longcheng Ting Shui. Gong Yimo saw this and was happy in her heart. This was because she knew very well what kind of person Chop Wang was. He looked very honest and kind, but he was the only homosexual she knew in this world. This was something that her subordinates had told her as a joke. They said that the king of a small country didn't love beauties but loved men. It wasn't that he didn't abstain from meat and vegetables, but that he was only interested in men. Moreover, it was said that he was a virgin. If Longcheng Ting Shui married over, she would also be a widow. However, she wouldn't say these things out loud. More than 1,000 lives. Well, Gong Yimo wasn't just because of those people. Longcheng Ting Shui had disgusted her so many times. She deserved to be disgusted for the rest of her life. She thought mischievously. She rubbed her chin. Recently, she seemed to be a bit angry. Not good, not good. Therefore, in such a chaotic atmosphere, Longcheng Ting Shui got married. The Chopper King personally came to Lu Yi to pick her up. They were travel-worn and couldn't bring anything. Therefore, the old Lu Yi king and the old Wang Fei prepared a lot for them to take away. Therefore, it could be considered a grand wedding. Last time, Longcheng Ting Shui was harshly reprimanded by Longcheng Wuji because of the Hua Ju family. That was why she was very well behaved on the day of her wedding. Although others might think she was glamorous, only she knew how she felt on the inside. Gong Yimo also saw Chopper King. He was about 30 years old and looked ordinary. Naturally, he was not liked by the old Lu Yi, so the old Lu Yi pulled him aside and nagged at him. Rather than calling it advice, it was more like a warning. The pitiful man listened obediently and was lectured like a grandson. Gong Yimo secretly pulled Gong Dai's arm and whispered to him, "Look, that's the little show I told you about. You know what little show is, right? I've explained it to you before. Don't look down on him just because he's weak. He's completely under the control of the old Lu Yi king. Little Shou is very powerful. Just you wait, when Long Cheng's Ting Shui arrives, she'll definitely be suppressed by Little Shou. She won't be able to be arrogant. Gong Ju listened with a smile, but in his heart he felt strange. His sister seemed to know everything. What was the reason for this? The palace was very lively. After the banquet, Long Cheng's Ting Shui was about to leave with Chopper King's people. If they were in Daiyu state, they would definitely be laughed at for leaving in such a hurry. When they left, everyone stood up and sent Long Cheng's Ting Shui to the gates of Hua City. From today onwards, she was no longer Lu Yi's most favored little princess, but a princess of a small country. The difference in status was not ordinary. When Long Cheng's Ting Shui left, she kept looking back, as if hoping that Long Cheng's Wuji would change his mind. At the city gates, Long Cheng's Ting Shui hugged the old princess and cried. Her reluctance to part was very moving. Long Cheng's Wuji stood at the city gates and looked at them without saying anything. In any case, she was definitely getting married today. Perhaps only when she got married would Lu Yi be able to live peacefully for a few days. At this time, Gong Yimo was also on the city walls. There were only the two of them up there. Looking at the wedding procession below, they felt like they were putting the blame on others. Gong Yimo sighed and then stretched out her hand. In her palm was a silver medal with Long Cheng's Wuji's name engraved on it. It was his life medal. Now that Hua Ju's family has fallen, and Long Cheng's Ting Shui, who has always disliked me, is also married, Lu Yi is still quite safe. I'll return this medal to you. She said it with a relaxed face. Long Cheng's Wuji looked at the small medal in her palm but did not say anything. Take it. Gong Yimo slightly raised her eyebrows and giggled. Are you going to give it to me? That's not good, right? She pretended to be shy. Only then did Long Cheng's Wuji smile and take the medal from her hand. But before Gong Yimo could say anything, he used his height advantage and hung the life medal around her neck. This made Gong Yimo stunned. What are you doing? Gong Yimo asked in confusion. This was Lu Yi's life medal, which represented the king. Why would he give it to her? Long Cheng's Wuji looked at her and said in a low voice, this life medal represents me, Long Cheng's Wuji. Rather than one day, it will sink into the sacred lake and never see the light of day. I'd rather it be hung around your neck and buried with you. Gong Yimo laughed when she heard this. What if I want to be cremated? Wouldn't the only evidence of your existence in this world be cremated with me? Who knew that Long Cheng's Wuji actually looked at her seriously? How fortunate is it to be fused with life and death? The afternoon sun shone on Long Cheng Wuji's face. His expression was firm and sincere, just like the sun, unswervingly shining wherever it was. It was also like the huge yellow stone city gate beneath them, eternally steady. He was the king of Lu Yi, he had no selfish motives, but he also had selfish motives. Even though he promised Gong Dai that he would no longer peek at Gong Yimo's thoughts, he still hoped that this thing that represented him could always be by her side. Gong Yimo smiled faintly. She took down the life medal, stood on her tiptoes and gently hung it around Long Cheng's neck. Back then, she had used a finger to take it away so frivolously. Now, she was giving it back so solemnly. I'm very happy that you think so highly of me, but I can't do this. This life medal belongs to your princess, and more importantly, it belongs to the sacred lake. Your roots are here, you are here, your heart should also be here. It should not follow me to a foreign place. Long Cheng's Wuji's eyes flashed with a trace of pain. Even this little bit of thought is not allowed. Gong Yimo smiled. Do you still remember what you said? You said, you want to make a contribution, live in people's hearts, verbally, and pass it down for generations. And I can also live in your sea of consciousness. What difference does it make whether I have this life medal or not? At this moment, a burst of music sounded. Long Cheng's Ting Shui was about to leave. The bridal procession on both sides blew the horn, and then played the four-stringed instrument to send the bride off. The sound of the four-stringed instrument was very pleasant and melodious, with a simple and mysterious aura of the grassland. Gong Yimo was immediately entranced, and murmured, Your country is a very outstanding country, and its people are also outstanding people. It should be like this four-stringed instrument, and continue to develop endlessly. And you are the one who will open the new door, their leader and spiritual pillar. Her expression gradually became serious. You are very important. Just as you said, you are Lu Yi's king. You don't belong to yourself, but you belong to them. Don't you think it's very meaningful? To be able to bear the will of so many people, to create an immortal foundation. What a delightful and fulfilling thing. Long Cheng's Wuji suddenly laughed. That laughter was very hearty, and also very happy. Finally, he stopped laughing, and looked at the people who followed him under the city gate, and said softly, "Yes, I belong to Lu Yi, and I am happy for it. I have a lot, but..." He looked at Gong Yimo's side profile, "But I can't have you." Chapter 373. By the time Lu Yi's matters were all settled, it was already more than 10 days later. Gong Dai and Yu Heng's envoy sat down to discuss the Three Kingdoms horse farms. Because Lu Yi was willing to provide the horses of these 18 horse farms, this matter went very smoothly. Gong Dai also made a request. He was willing to send people to clear the road across the Three Kingdoms, but he hoped that all the relay stations of these 18 horse farms would belong to Gong Yimo. Lu Yi had already agreed, so naturally, he had no objections. When Yu Heng's people heard that it was for the princess, they happily agreed. This matter was considered a preliminary agreement. As for the laws and regulations, they still needed to go through further negotiations. However, this first meeting was done and sealed. After these matters were settled, it was time to go back. Gong Yimo was preparing her luggage when the door rang. It turned out that Yu Heng's envoy was requesting an audience. Gong Yimo had seen this person before. "Greetings to your highness." Gong Yimo smiled very amiably. "What business do you have with me?" That person quickly explained, "The second prince has a message for you. His Highness said that he wants to thank the princess for helping him when he was passing by Yu Heng last year. It was because of this that he was not so passive. However, His Highness is currently busy with the coronation, so it is inconvenient for him to personally thank you. He hopes that when you pass by Yu Heng on your way back, you can attend His Highness's coronation ceremony." Gong Yimo smiled. "It's finally time for the coronation. Why did it take so long?" That person replied, "When His Highness returned to the country, there were still some remnants causing trouble, such as an Avsilla. They caused trouble because of His Highness's background, so it took some effort to eliminate them." Gong Yimo nodded. "I see. I will definitely attend Kim Yoon Gij's coronation ceremony. Please pass on a message that I will definitely be there." That person's face was full of smiles. "Then this foreign subject will not disturb you. I believe that His Highness will be very happy with this news." Gong Yimo smiled. "Go ahead." After they left, Gong Yimo sighed. This Yu Heng was finally done. Lu Yi also seemed to have a lot of things to do. However, since there was nothing for her to do, it was time to leave. On the day of his departure, everyone in Hua Cheng came to see him off. Last time, they had wronged Gong Yimo and felt very embarrassed. She was a person from Daiyu State, and she had put in so much effort to help them solve their grain problem. However, they still doubted her and almost caused her to die under the blade of their king. Gong Yimo did not take it to heart. The situation at that time was very normal. Anyway, the main culprit was dead, so she would not bother about it. Gong Dai was even more direct. After bidding farewell to the palace, he quickly left, as if he did not want to stay in Hua City for another second. Therefore, the group of people left Hua City under the escort of the people. Dragon City's Wuji did not come out to see them off. This was good, as it would save them from being sad when they parted. After leaving Hua City, Gong Yimo felt her body lighten. She looked at Gong Dai and said with a smile, "Gong Dai, does Imperial Father know that you brought so many soldiers with you?" Gong Dai said lightly, "They are not soldiers from the Imperial City." Seeing that Gong Yimo did not understand, he pursed his lips and smiled. After leaving Lu Yi's Hua City, he was in a good mood and smiled more often. "They are soldiers from the West Province. Back then, Imperial Father gave me 30,000 soldiers in the West Province. They are private soldiers that I secretly trained." Gong Yimo was slightly speechless. Gong Dai was really daring. Even if the military power was in Gong Dai's hands, this kind of private mobilization of soldiers was a big crime. So they will return to the West Province directly from Lu Yi? Gong Dai nodded. When the time comes, there will only be 100 or so people returning to Dai Yu State with us. Gong Yimo could not help but admire Gong Dai's foresight. Fortunately, he had mobilized the soldiers, which saved them a lot of trouble. At this time, it was the time when everything in Lu Yi was growing. The grass was green and the breeze was refreshing. At this time, a melodious sound suddenly came. Gong Yimo listened and saw that it was the sound of a piccolo, who was playing a farewell song on her way to leave. Gong Yimo turned around and saw Dragon City's Wuji. He was riding alone on a horse and playing the flute. In her previous life and this life, she did not know that Dragon City's Wuji could play the flute, and played it so well. However, Gong Dai was not happy. He looked at Dragon City's Wuji. Is King Lu Yi here to send us off? Dragon City's Wuji looked at him openly. I will keep my promise, but there are a few words that I want to say only to Gong Yimo. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and looked at him. There was a trace of impatience on his handsome face, but when he looked at Gong Yimo, it turned into a sigh. He led his men and urged their horses forward a few steps so that the two of them could have some space to speak. It was not that he was gentlemanly, but he knew that the royal sister did not like to be tied down. Moreover, the royal sister had a good heart and Dragon City's Wuji was a man who kept his promises. Although he felt that it was troublesome, he still gave him a chance. Perhaps, this would be the last time Dragon City's Wuji would see the royal sister. Dragon City's Wuji had the same thought. This might be the last time he would see Gong Yimo. No matter how powerful a woman was, she would still get married. Once she got married, she would no longer be able to fly around like an eagle. Therefore, he let himself be. For the first time, he looked at Gong Yimo in a daze, as if he wanted to imprint her appearance deeply in his mind. No matter how harsh the years were, it would not be able to erase her appearance. Moa. He smiled. This was also the first time he called her that. It was 3 parts careful and 7 parts painful. He had nothing to say. He picked up his flute again and played a farewell song. It was said that a song could touch a person's heart. The lingering feelings, happiness, pain and sorrow of parting seemed to be expressed through this song. Gong Yimo sighed softly. Parting was something that was hard to get used to no matter how many times she experienced it. But the song had to end, and people had to part. When the last note fell, Dragon City's Wuji urged his horse forward. The moment the 2 horses drew close, he reached out his hand towards her and cut off a strand of her hair. Gong Yimo was stunned. She asked, "What are you doing?" At this moment, Dragon City's Wuji had already placed the strand of hair back into his arms. Looking at her, those beautiful deep blue eyes were filled with tenderness and forbearance. The divine ancestor has already promised me that I can use your hair to make a life tablet. Gong Yimo was puzzled. Didn't they say that only fetal hair could be used? Why was it possible to use strand of hair now? But this was not the main point. She asked blankly, "What do you want my life tablet for?" She blinked her eyes in confusion. Her small face was smooth and her eyes were clear. No matter how many times he looked at them, Dragon City's Wuji felt that her eyes were wider than the sky and cleaner than the sacred lake. He sighed softly. "I will link your life card with my life card. Because, even if I create an immortal foundation, I will still grow old and die. My life tablet will still sink into the sacred lake. And when that day comes, I only hope that the name that will be entangled with my life tablet and sink into the lake together, will be you." He took a deep breath and laughed towards the sky. "It is already impossible in this life. Perhaps this way, I can look forward to being entangled with you in the next life." This affection was heavy. At that moment, Gong Yimo felt as if she could not breathe. Dragon City's Wuji looked at her greedily. Perhaps, this would be the last time in his life that he could chase after what he wanted. The last time that he could follow his heart. In the end, he, the strongest man in the grasslands, the bravest eagle's son, actually choked up slightly in front of her. At this moment, I actually feel that, being remembered by the world cannot be compared to you remembering me. He smiled. The bitterness in his smile did not suit him at all. Take care. No matter if we meet again or not, please do not forget Lu Yi, and I. Dragon City's Wuji. Gong Yimo lowered her head and said softly, I will not forget you. Goodbye. After saying that, she did not dare to look at him again. She urged her horse and left, leaving behind a back view on the grasslands. The sun shone brightly that day. It was actually so dazzling. Chapter 374. Tomorrow would be Gong Yimo's 18th birthday. Gong Dai watched as Gong Yimo half knelt on the grass to wash her face. The gurgling water was very shallow and very clear. Under the sunlight, the sparkling water splashed and sparkled. It was a different kind of seductive sight. At this time, Gong Dai's private army had already taken another route from Lu Yi back to Shiju. There were only about 100 of them walking on the grassland. It would probably take another 2 or 3 days before they could leave Lu Yi. This made Gong Dai feel a little troubled. How could he celebrate royal sister's birthday in this place where there were no villages or shops? Gong Dai grew up under the influence of Gong Yimo. Naturally, he also understood that it was different from what his teachers taught him. There were many men who got married at the age of 12. However, in royal sister's mind, it seemed that one would only be considered an adult at the age of 18. Gong Dai calculated. He would be 18 in half a year, so he would be considered an adult, right? However, he had prepared a birthday gift, and royal sister would definitely like it. At night, a group of people began to set up camp. Unlike winter, although Lu Yi also had a kang bed, the thing that they used to make fires was very special. It burned animal feces for warmth. Although it made the best use of everything, it also made the house smell very strange. Fortunately, the palace did not have such a smell. It had to be said that whether it was Lu Yi or Yuheng, they were all trying their best to become Chinese. Perhaps one day in the future, someone would unify the 4 countries. Gong Yimo smiled. However, if one wanted to unify the 4 countries, it was usually through war. She probably would not be able to see it in her lifetime. The sky darkened. The stars on the grassland lit up one by one. There was still a trace of orange and purple on the horizon that had not faded. There were already stars above her head. Gong Yimo lay on the grass with her arms and legs spread out. It was really comfortable to lie like this after eating. Gong Dai sat beside her. In the end, he couldn't dissuade Gong Yimo and lay down as well. The 100-odd Imperial Army soldiers were definitely doing what they were supposed to do. They didn't even dare to look over here. Furthermore, the grass was a little tall. From the angle where they were lying down and setting up camp, they really couldn't see what they were doing. Gong Yimo chuckled when she saw Gong Dai's uneasiness. Ever since he was young, Gong Dai loved cleanliness. Lying on the ground like this was actually a very difficult thing for him, right? Don't you think it's cool and comfortable? Gong Dai turned his head and saw Gong Yimo snickering. It had been like this since they were young. As long as he felt uncomfortable, the royal sister would be happy. Thinking of this, his handsome face became even more helpless. Looking into his eyes, there was an indescribable doting. The light from the fire shone from afar. Their vision wasn't very clear, but they were very close. Their breaths were almost intertwined. Gong Yimo used the starlight and firelight to look at him. She only felt that in such a blurry state, Gong Ju's sharp aura had diminished a lot. He looked more handsome, and his coldness retreated, making him appear very gentle. What's wrong? Being stared at by Gong Yimo like this, he was actually a little embarrassed. That special voice came out from his thin lips. Hearing it in this kind of night, it was especially seductive. Gong Yimo smiled but didn't say anything. The more she looked at Gong Dai, the more she felt that he was very good now. Beautiful eyes, a high nose, and thin but stylish lips. But the knot in her heart couldn't be untied. Thinking about it, Gong Dai was quite wronged. He actually had to pay for something he didn't do in this life. But, who asked the person she met in both lives to be Gong Dai? Feeling Gong Dai holding her hand and asking again, Gong Yimo smiled and said, I read a little fable when I was young. Do you want to hear it? Gong Dai was stunned. Then, he moved closer to her, indicating that he was willing to listen. When he was young, Gong Yimo would always teach him some principles through stories she read in books. Even if she didn't have any experience, who would say that she didn't do well? Gong Yimo thought for a while and said, there was a woman who wanted to jump into a river. Then, a boatman saw her and hurriedly rowed the boat over to ask for the reason. The woman said that she came here on a boat 3 years ago. She married a good man and thought that she would live a happy life. In the end, she found out that she was used by her husband. After being used, she was persecuted by his concubine and was abandoned. In a short 3 years, she had nothing. In grief, she wanted to end her life. When Gong Yimo said this, she spoke very slowly. Her eyes were staring blankly at the sky. The emotions in her eyes made the sensitive Gong Dai frown slightly. He suddenly felt that what she was going to say was very important to him. Gong Yimo continued, after the boatman heard this, he didn't say a word. He only let the woman get on the boat. He took the woman around the lake and sent her ashore. The woman didn't understand. The boatman smiled and said, now you have returned to 3 years ago when you first came here. You also have nothing. But if you continue to live, you will have a lot. This was originally an inspiring prophecy. The meaning of its spread was to guide people to let go of their pain and find happiness. For some reason, when Gong Yimo finished this story, her expression was slightly perplexed. Then, she asked, the story ends here. But what do you think will happen to the woman after she is sent back? Gong Dai's heart suddenly trembled. He suddenly felt that this story was very likely to be the deepest knot in Royal Sister's heart. But why? Gong Dai was deep in thought. Gong Yimo said again, do you think she will listen to the old man and let go of everything? Nothing happened back then and start anew? Or will she wait for the old man to leave and continue to seek death? If it was in the past, Gong Dai would definitely say that the woman would die. Because many things, many happiness, after obtaining them, were bloody exposed and told that it was all an illusion. The truth was that she was used and then abandoned. How could that kind of pain be erased with just a few words? After all, the deeper the love, the deeper the hatred. Not to mention other things, even if the woman really returned to 3 years ago, it was still a question whether her scarred heart could hold on. So, he felt that the woman would definitely die. If she could get over it so easily, she wouldn't have appeared by the lake to seek death. But why would Royal Sister suddenly ask this question? What if the woman was Royal Sister? A strong person like her would definitely not seek death. But how would she continue to live? A faint light flashed in his mind. But before he could grasp it, Gong Yimo shook his hand and asked, you haven't answered me. Looking at the beautiful face in front of him, Gong Dai unexpectedly said, since there is a chance to start anew, then it must be anew. Maybe the boatman was really a deity and allowed her to return to 3 years ago. Gong Yimo heard this and thought for a while. She suddenly turned around and leaned closer to him. She looked seriously into Gong Dai's eyes and finally said, Gong Dai, you're lying to me. Chapter 375. Her words made Gong Dai suddenly shocked. Because he suddenly felt that Gong Yimo was a bit off. Before he could figure out what was wrong, Gong Yimo had already said it. With my understanding of you, your judgment should be that she will die. He couldn't say what he felt, but he felt that Gong Yimo's expression was indescribable and her tone was faint. Then let's change the question. Do you think that if this woman was really sent back to 3 years ago by the boatman and she didn't seek death, then would she take revenge on her husband and concubine who harmed her, or would she live her own life and never interact with them again? Her aggressive question actually made Gong Dai slightly frown. Gong Dai put himself in her shoes and thought that if it was him, even if those people didn't provoke him, he would still make the first move. He was this tyrannical and unreasonable. He only wanted to vent the anger in his heart. But why did Royal Sister ask him this? He thought of something and his back suddenly broke out in cold sweat. The warmth of the night was completely destroyed by Gong Yimo's words. His brows were tightly knit and he didn't know how to answer. Let go of the hatred and never interact with them again. This answer didn't seem like something he would say, but seeing Gong Yimo's face so close, he softly said it. Since it hasn't happened, then let's just treat it as a nightmare. There's no need to take revenge and break off relations, right? Gong Dai himself felt that he was lying, let alone Gong Yimo who was listening. She softly nestled in his embrace and smiled. Her slender fingers grabbed his chest and her head gently rubbed against his chin. They were so close right now, but Gong Dai felt a strange sense of danger, so he didn't speak easily. Gong Dai. She seemed to laugh until tears came out. Her large eyes looked up and sparkling tears filled them. You're lying to me again. Her expression suddenly changed and became dangerous. And at this time, Gong Dai, who felt uneasy, lowered his head and kissed her lip. He was so anxious, as if this was the only way he could feel her real existence. They kissed deeply for a long time until Gong Yimo's inexplicable hostility subsided. Only then did he let go of her. Gong Yimo looked at him in confusion. She didn't seem to understand why the two of them kissed. Seeing her like this, Gong Dai heaved a sigh of relief and said seriously, I'm not lying to you. If your assumption is true and I'm the one who suffered all this, I won't lie to you. I'll kill all of them. Even if they don't have the time to hurt me, I won't give them the chance. But if the target is you, and you're the one who was persecuted, and I'm the ignorant one who hurt you, then I sincerely hope that you can give me, the blind one who hurt you, a chance. Don't blame me for something that hasn't happened, because I will never hurt you again. He lowered his head and grabbed Gong Yimo's hand in a panic. Perhaps people have many reincarnations. Although I don't believe in this, but if I hurt you in one life, or even killed you in another life, but in this life, I only want to be good to you. I can't guarantee my past lives, but in this life, I can guarantee it. So I'm not lying to you. Gong Yimo blinked and digested his words with difficulty. At the same time, she was a little annoyed at herself for suddenly saying such things. Gong Dai was so smart. What if he really guessed something? Recently, she always felt that the hostility in her heart was getting stronger and stronger, but she didn't know why. And she was right. Gong Dai really guessed it. In his heart, a bold and wonderful idea suddenly sprouted. Because in his heart, Gong Yimo had always been a godlike existence. Since she had such a miraculous space, why couldn't she peek into the past and present lives? Why did she ask such a question? It had to be said that Gong Dai was really very smart, and his imagination was rich. His guesses were infinitely close to the truth. He suddenly hugged Gong Yimo, who was in deep thought, in his arms. He really felt her existence. He sighed and reached out to touch her hair. Her hair was very soft and fragrant. It made people want to kiss her. No matter what, you can't leave my world, he said. Even if his assumption was true, and Gong Yimo really could peek into the past and present lives, she came to his side for a special reason, and then left him because of the previous life. Then he would really be wronged. He said firmly, even if you want to punish me, you have to stay by my side to punish me. You can't leave. Gong Yimo felt a little strange being hugged by him like this. But the affection in his voice was so serious that she couldn't refuse. At this time, Gong Yimo suddenly thought of something. She patted Gong Dai twice and then took something from her waist. Her expression was a little strange. This seemingly ordinary stone had not emitted any light after the first time. However, when she thought of the strange things that had happened to her during this period of time, she suddenly felt that, could it be that this thing was causing trouble? After all, it was regarded as a sacred stone by the Snow Clan. It shouldn't be just a symbol of status, right? The first time she touched this stone, she felt a little dizzy. This stone should have some hidden radiation. Gong Dai suddenly saw this stone and felt a little strange. But he felt that this stone seemed to have an inexplicable attraction to him. He couldn't help but reach out to touch it. At that moment, there seemed to be something in his mind, and he felt dizzy. Gong Yimo didn't have time to say anything. She saw him frowning and quickly asked him, "What's wrong?" In a daze, he heard Gong Yimo's voice. He felt his brain heat up. Before he could react, his body was already on top of Gong Yimo. Feeling the heat in his heart, he suddenly felt a little strange and asked, "What's wrong with me?" It was as if his suppressed subconscious was suddenly released. His body moved faster than his mind. Gong Yimo was also shocked. Then she looked at the stone in her hand. She suddenly had an idea. Did this stone contain some kind of radiation that could temporarily affect people's minds? But she had worn it for so long and felt that it didn't affect her much. So she boldly thought that it might have something to do with the will of the person who touched it. The weaker the will, the easier it was to be affected. It seemed that she had to find someone to test it. She immediately did as she thought, but Gong Dai was already on top of her. How could she bear to go down? At this time, the grass was covering them. No one could see what they were doing. Gong Dai, go down. I want to do an experiment. Wait. He suddenly smiled. His handsome face looked even more soul-stirring under the light of the fire. There's no hurry. Royal sister, you're almost an adult. He lowered his head. Their hair and breath intertwined. When you're an adult, you're no longer a child. Gong Yimo crossed her arms and asked cautiously, what are you doing? Chapter 376. Gong Dai smiled and blinked as he asked her. His tone sounded like he was acting coquettishly. Royal sister, when do you plan to give yourself to me? Gong Yimo was stunned. She hadn't even agreed to be with Gong Dai yet, and this guy was already thinking about things that were inappropriate for children. But she really wanted it. Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo with infatuation. For so many years, he had been thinking about how to devour Royal sister every day. His heart ached from thinking about it. You wish. Gong Yimo said angrily. Her face flushed red, and she didn't know why, but she suddenly remembered the time when she was being treated like this on horseback, and her face turned even redder. Gong Dai, this guy, couldn't be thinking of using the ground as his bed and the sky as his blanket to do something, right? In reality, she was overthinking. How could Gong Dai treat her so casually? Royal sister, close your eyes. Why would Gong Yimo listen to him? Her eyes were wide open. Gong Dai laughed inwardly. If you don't close your eyes and continue to look at me like this, I won't be able to control myself. When Gong Yimo heard this, she really did close her eyes tightly. Gong Dai laughed inwardly as he looked at her. His body couldn't hold it in anymore, but it didn't matter. He could endure it. After all, Royal sister was his. She couldn't run away. He lowered his head and kissed her eyes. Then, following her eyes downwards, he kissed the tip of her nose and then her lips. The wind gently blew the grass, revealing Gong Dai's slightly raised back. If the people at the campsite saw this, they might think that they were doing something. Gong Yimo panicked. She hugged Gong Dai's back and pressed it against his. The two of them were instantly intimate. Even Gong Dai widened his eyes and looked at her in surprise. His gaze instantly turned fiery. She really wasn't inviting him. Gong Yimo felt like crying. Gong Dai lowered his head and chuckled in her ear. Royal sister, this is the first time you've taken the initiative. As he spoke, he kissed her earlobe sincerely. It was soft and ticklish. At that moment, Gong Yimo could not help but let out a soft moan. In the next second, she wished she could bite off her own tongue. Needless to say, Gong Dai was so aroused by her soft voice that he almost couldn't control himself. He almost wanted to eat her alive. Gong Yimo wished she could find a hole to hide in. She was too ashamed to continue living. Fortunately, the two of them restrained themselves. Gong Yimo hadn't let go of the knot in her heart, but after resisting for a while, she actually let him go. As for Gong Dai, he didn't want to take her so casually. However, he didn't hold back on kissing or hugging her. That kind of careful touch made both of their souls tremble. It was exciting and made them want more. From time to time, they would whisper sweet nothings and talk about the past and the future. Time passed very quickly. In the end, as the two of them kissed, a faint ray of light rose from the horizon and shone through the gaps between their overlapping bodies. A night had passed just like that. As Gong Dai kissed her, he himself was a little out of breath. As for Gong Yimo, needless to say, she had already turned into spring water and closed her eyes like a cat. Her sweet appearance made Gong Dai unable to get enough of kissing her. They kissed, and their lips were a little red and swollen. Royal sister, he said hoarsely. He shouted hoarsely, but Gong Yimo's weak response almost melted his whole body. The gentleness in his eyes was more than sweetness. Because Gong Yimo was so obedient, it was a direct reflection of her inner heart. She treated him differently, very differently. He gently traced Gong Yimo's eyes with his fingers. They were moist, like a flower waiting to be plucked, as delicate as its first blooming. In my life, the luckiest and happiest thing was to meet you. He said these words in such a serious manner in the morning, and after a night of entanglement, it would be a lie to say that she wasn't moved. Gong Yimo even felt her heart itch. At that moment, she couldn't wait to tell him the secret of her birth so that he wouldn't feel so pressured. But just as she was thinking about whether she should tell him, she felt a chill on her chest. Gong Dai, was he finally willing to tear off her clothes? Wait a minute. Why did she use the word finally? But soon, she felt that she was dirty, because Gong Dai only put something under her outer clothes, and in the end, fastened it on Gong Yimo's chest. Gong Yimo looked down and saw that it was a soft armor similar to a tube top. Furthermore, it looked extremely unfamiliar. He had never seen such an armor before. Gong Dai's face was a little red, because he accidentally touched Gong Yimo's chest. After being intimate for so long, he had actually been very obedient except for kissing and hugging. Today, because of this special reason, he touched where he shouldn't have touched, and it made his face red and his heart beat for a while. This is the chainmail I personally made for you. It's specially made to protect your heart, royal sister. You're always causing trouble, only this way can I feel a little more at ease. He used sky silk and meteoric copper wire as the raw materials. Not only were they rare, but they were also very tough and light as if they were weightless. It only wrapped around the chest, and it didn't cause much of a feeling of restraint. In order to make this, he didn't know how many raw materials he had used, and it was all burning money. It made Lo Chi, this expressionless subordinate, feel a little pained, but in the end, it was a good thing, and Gong Dai was still quite satisfied. Gong Yimo looked at him carefully putting on her outer clothes, and suddenly felt like crying. It was as if she had originally thought that Gong Dai was the big bad wolf, but suddenly became a little white rabbit. So the person who hugged her and didn't let go last night was someone else? This is your birthday present for me. Gong Yimo touched her chest. Gong Dai sat up and turned his head away. You don't like it? Gong Yimo smiled. No. I like it very much. As she said that, she leaned forward and kissed Gong Dai on the cheek. This time, both of them were stunned. Gong Yimo was at a loss. Had she unknowingly developed a habit of doing this? With this thought, she didn't dare to look at Gong Dai, and quickly ran away. She still wanted to study that strange stone. Perhaps there would be a surprise. Although dawn had broken, the sky was still dark. There were only patrolling Imperial guards in the camp. When they saw Gong Yimo return, their expressions didn't change, and they just saluted her. This made Gong Yimo feel even more awkward. She felt that their gazes were hinting at something. After all, they had been lying in the grass for the whole night. Scary. How could she let Gong Dai do whatever he wanted to her so easily? Fortunately, Gong Dai was a strict commander, and they didn't say anything. When they were on the road during the day, their expressions were very serious. Gong Yimo sat on the horse and played with the black stone. This stone might be something like a meteorite, so it had some special effects. Moreover, every time she touched it, she would feel a tremor in her soul. No wonder it was called a sacred stone. She didn't know why, but she felt that this stone was actually related to her. That faint connection was not clear in the past, but now it was very clear. It made her a little puzzled. Chapter 377. In Yuheng Kingdom. Kim Yoon's ascension to the throne was basically what everyone expected, especially now that all the opponents had been eliminated, so the entire Yuheng Kingdom was very lively, showing that it was thriving. Tomorrow was the ascension ceremony, and most of the guests had arrived, but Kim Yoon had been waiting for Gong Yimo, so when he saw that there was still no news from her, he couldn't help but feel a little anxious. He even wondered if he should change the date. At this moment, the sound of porcelain shattering woke Kim Yoon up. He looked helplessly at his mother, Yoon Jin, who was now the Empress Dowager, and sighed. Mother, it's only 3 years of fasting. This is already the lightest punishment. Why are you still angry? Yoon Jin killed Jin Sheng with her own hands. Even if Gong Yimo forced her to do so, no one knew Gong Yimo, only Yoon Jin, so she was bound to be charged with murdering her husband. When Kim Yoon came back, an of Silla used this point to criticize him in order to rise to the throne. He said that Yoon Jin killed her husband because she felt guilty, because Kim Yoon wasn't the emperor's child. Now, although an of Silla and the others had been defeated, Kim Yoon became the emperor, and Yoon Jin became the empress dowager. Those old fogies in the court still couldn't agree with Yoon Jin's way of doing things. They thought that Yoon Jin should be fasting for the late emperor and worship Buddha for the rest of her life. It was Kim Yoon who insisted that Yoon Jin be allowed to stay in the imperial mausoleum for 3 years. Otherwise, it would be immoral and unworthy of being the empress dowager. Yoon Jin didn't want to do that. Now that her son was the emperor, it was her time to shine. Why did she have to abstain from fasting? Why did she have to stay in the imperial mausoleum? Just to get the approval of those old fogies in the court. So what if she didn't go? Besides, she wasn't the only one who killed Jin Sheng back then. Why did they come looking for trouble with her? Wasn't it because they were afraid of Gong Yimo and thought that she was easy to bully? I won't go. Yoon Jin's attitude was firm. No. Kim Yoon shook his head. After the coronation, I will send you there. Mother, please don't make things difficult for me. In fact, the reason why Kim Yoon was so determined to send Yoon Jin away was not because he felt guilty towards Jin Sheng, nor was it to shut the mouths of those old officials. It was because Yoon Jin had been too absurd in the past half year. She seemed to have spent all her energy on men and was unable to resist those handsome and gentle men. In the past, she had only done it secretly, but now she was doing it openly. Although outsiders didn't know about this, Kim Yoon knew that he couldn't hide the truth. So he wanted to send Yoon Jin away before the matter got out of hand. Then he could get rid of those men and kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Seeing that Kim Yoon was so determined and that he was indifferent to her for so long, Yoon Jin gritted her teeth and had no choice but to tell him the real reason. I can't go to the imperial mausoleum. Her voice became softer and softer as she looked at her lower abdomen, revealing a troubled expression. Because I have a child. This was simply a bolt from the blue. Jin Sheng had only been dead for half a year and she was actually pregnant. Kim Yoon turned pale with fright. He stood up from his seat with a bang. He looked left and right. Fortunately, everyone had been dismissed. Otherwise, he would have to silence her with murder for this kind of scandal. Yoon Jin saw that Kim Yoon was staring at her with wide eyes. It seemed to be the first time he was so surprised and fierce. He stared at her as if he couldn't wait to give her a beating. Kim Yoon took a deep breath. Imperial Mother, do you know what you're doing? Yoon Jin was stunned by the roar. She wasn't very sure herself, but her period had always been punctual. It was already 10 days late, so it seemed that it couldn't be wrong. Because Kim Yoon had been busy with the ascension of the throne, this matter had been kept secret for so long. Seeing that she didn't speak, Kim Yoon's gloomy gaze fell on Yoon Jin's lower abdomen. He squeezed out 2 words from between his teeth. Whose? Yoon Jin shrunk her neck. It's Wang Jing. Kim Yoon closed his eyes. Damn you, Wang Jing. That overwhelming hatred couldn't be suppressed. At this moment, his confidant walked over. As if he didn't see the stalemate between mother and son, he happily whispered something into Kim Yoon's ear. Your Highness, Daiyu State's Princess Jiyu Guo and Daiyu State's Prince Qi have arrived. Should we immediately announce their arrival? Kim Yoon's eyes lit up, then he glared fiercely at Yoon Jin. See them. But before he left, he ordered people to surround the entire Empress Dowager's palace. No one was allowed to enter, only then did he go to the main hall to receive the guests. Moa! They hadn't seen each other for more than half a year. But he almost forgot that Gong Yimo, she didn't come alone. Therefore, when Kim Yoon saw Gong Dai, his expression couldn't turn around for a moment. However, Gong Dai didn't look at him. The 2 of them exchanged glances and then looked away. Gong Yimo called out, Kim Yoon Gij. Her voice was clear and filled with joy. They hadn't seen each other for more than half a year. At the age of 18, she was like a flower bud that had just bloomed. With just one look, Kim Yoon couldn't take his eyes off her. Kim Yoon was also a beautiful person. Now, his nobility had deepened. He couldn't be mentioned in the same breath as he was in the past. When Gong Yimo saw him, her greeting strangely turned into a compliment. After not seeing each other for half a year, Kim Yoon-gij has become even more magnificent. Kim Yoon was rather uncomfortable. This was what he wanted to say but didn't dare to say. He didn't expect Mo-er to say it first. On the other hand, Gong Dai was unhappy when he heard this. Although royal sister didn't mean anything other than a compliment, he didn't look bad either. Why didn't royal sister praise him like this when they met? Kim Yoon glanced at Gong Dai intentionally or unintentionally. Then, he focused on chatting with Gong Yimo. However, after reminiscing about the past, Kim Yoon couldn't help but let out a long sigh and asked Gong Yimo to ask, "What's wrong?" Kim Yoon shook his head. If it was just Gong Yimo, he might have said it directly. However, there was also Gong Dai. He didn't want his love rival to laugh at him. However, Gong Yimo was very smart. She guessed it almost immediately. "But your mother?" Kim Yoon nodded. Gong Yimo thought so too. Now that Kim Yoon had great power in Yuheng, there was almost nothing to worry about. The only thing that could trouble him was Yoon Jin. However, what did Yoon Jin have that could trouble him? She suddenly thought of the time when she left Yuheng for Lu Yi. In the end, Yoon Jin was crying in Wang Jing's arms. She suddenly had a strange association and said it out loud. "She can't be." Gong Yimo's gaze fell on Kim Yoon's abdomen. This suggestive gaze made Kim Yoon's face turn red. Finally, he nodded. It was true. Gong Yimo was stunned. She didn't expect Yoon Jin to be so bold. Jin Sheng had only been dead for half a year, right? She probably couldn't die in peace now. On the other hand, Gong Dai didn't understand because Gong Yimo was facing him sideways. He couldn't see Gong Yimo's gaze. However, seeing that the two of them didn't say anything and could communicate with just a glance, Gong Dai felt more and more unhappy. He felt that Kim Yoon had unknowingly snatched away his exclusive. Chapter 378. Kim Yoon chatted with Gong Yimo for a while and then went to work. When Gong Yimo and Gong Dai were about to rest, Yoon Jin came to invite them. Kim Yoon didn't want to let Yoon Jin meet anyone, but when he thought that it was Gong Yimo, he was relieved and agreed to let them meet. Gong Dai didn't have a good impression of the Empress Dowager of Yuheng, so he wanted to accompany Gong Yimo. The person who came to invite them had no choice but to invite two people. It was also the first time that Yoon Jin saw Gong Dai. Yoon Jin had no immunity to good-looking people. Unfortunately, she didn't find anyone who was as good-looking as her son after searching for so long. It made her proud and helpless. So when she saw Gong Dai for the first time, she couldn't take her eyes off him. The people she met were all middle-aged men or young men. They were all mature. How could they be as fresh as Gong Dai? Not only were his eyebrows picturesque, but his temperament was also unique. It was a kind of temperament that perfectly combined handsomeness and coldness. He was like a banished immortal, just like the description in the book of songs that she read when she was young. But after knowing who Gong Dai was, she was a little unconvinced. Gong Yimo was really lucky. She had everything. It had to be said that Madame Yoon Jin was really a young girl with a happy heart. When Gong Yimo came in, she couldn't help but look at Yoon Jin's belly. She clicked her tongue in her heart. Even in modern times, a woman in her 40s was considered an advanced age. No matter how well Yoon Jin took care of herself, her body was still honest. She could still get pregnant. Then, when she saw that Yoon Jin kept staring at Gong Dai, she was a little dissatisfied. She blocked Gong Dai behind her and said to Yoon Jin, who was sitting at the top, "Why did the Empress Dowager summon me?" Yoon Jin frowned slightly. She felt that Gong Yimo was too casual. She was always talking about herself without any sense of identity. She said softly, "Gong Yimo, you've caused Ijia to suffer so much." Gong Yimo was stunned. "What have I done to you?" Yoon Jin reclined on the couch as tears streamed down her face. "If it weren't for your superfluous actions, forcing me to poison Jin Sheng, why would I need to guard the imperial mausoleum?" Gong Yimo felt a little regretful. After killing the emperor, she only needed to guard the imperial mausoleum. This Kim Yoon, It was because he couldn't bear to be ruthless towards his mother that he became bolder and bolder. However, Gong Yimo had always been rude to her. She said in annoyance. "You're right. I shouldn't have done that back then. Otherwise, you would have reincarnated by now. It seems like I've blocked your good future." Yoon Jin's beautiful eyes narrowed, then she looked at Gong Dai and said, "Prince Chi of Dai Yu State, please leave first. Ijia and the princess still have matters to discuss." Gong Dai said indifferently, "There's nothing that can't be heard. Royal sister's matters are this prince's matters." He finally opened his mouth, but he blocked Yoon Jin's words again. Yoon Jin felt indignant, but she couldn't do anything about it. She had chased out all the palace servants and no one was helping her. Moreover, the situation was urgent, so she couldn't care less. She might as well cut to the chase. Gong Yimo, a straightforward person, doesn't resort to insinuations. If you can convince Yoon to exempt Ijia from guarding the coffin for 3 years, Ijia will tell you something important that is related to you. Gong Yimo was amused. She didn't believe that there was something that Yoon Jin knew that she didn't. Yoon Jin's eyes narrowed. "It's related to your birth. This, you want others to know?" The others she was referring to was naturally Gong Dai. Gong Yimo suddenly realized something. She looked at Yoon Jin thoughtfully. She was afraid that Yoon Jin would know that she wasn't the biological daughter of the Dai Yu State's emperor. However, if she asked Gong Dai to leave now, it would be too hurtful. Seeing that she was so nervous, Gong Dai suddenly felt that it was a little strange. Was it about the Xue clan? Then his eyes darkened. It seemed that royal sister still had her secrets that she didn't want him to know. He lowered his eyes and spoke softly. "Since that's the case, royal sister, I'm a little tired. I'll go rest first." He was always like this. He always put Gong Yimo first, so Gong Yimo subconsciously pulled him back. She looked conflicted, as if she had made a big decision. "It's okay. You stay." Seeing that Gong Dai was only surprised for a moment and then looked at her with a smile, Gong Yimo sighed in relief. Then, she looked at Yoon Jin nervously. Only the Empress, Empress Dowager, Emperor, and Chang she knew that she wasn't the biological daughter of the Emperor. And for the sake of the Emperor's reputation, these 4 people definitely wouldn't speak carelessly. As for the Xue clan in Lu Yi, even if they found out that she wasn't the Emperor's biological daughter, it didn't matter. They wouldn't spread the news here. Thinking of this, she calmed down and asked, "If you have something to say, just say it. If it's worth my help, I'll consider it." Her tough attitude angered Yoon Jin, but she was asking for help now. If Gong Yimo didn't help, she might have to give birth to this child. She wasn't willing. But it was even more impossible to guard the imperial tombs with a pregnant belly. If she was found out, she would be thrown into a pig cage. No matter what others said, it was useless. Only Gong Yimo could convince Kim Yoon. So she suppressed her unwillingness and took out the news that she had accidentally obtained to make a deal with Gong Yimo. So with Gong Dai here, she didn't hesitate for long and said it. "I think you've already seen the Xue clan. They're the remnants of Xue country, but they still have some ability. Now, other than Dai Yu State, they have a certain amount of power in the other 3 countries. They're also your mother's clansmen." Gong Yimo exhaled softly. "If that's the case, I already knew." Yoon Jin smiled slightly, her expression slightly frivolous. "Of course it's not just that. The Xue clan is very united, but there are also a few ignorant and incompetent people. One of them, in order to survive, told Ijia something interesting." Gong Yimo's interest was slightly aroused. "What is it?" Yoon Jin lowered her voice and blinked her charming eyes. "Although your Xue clan was destroyed, they still left behind a treasure." Gong Yimo's pupils contracted slightly, then she smiled. "Empress Dowager, you probably don't know the reason why the Xue clan was destroyed, right?" She looked at Gong Dai and said softly, "The Xue clan was too poor, and the winters were hard to endure. They repeatedly invaded the borders of Dai Yu State and were destroyed by Imperial Father. How could there be a treasure in a place like this?" Gong Yimo didn't believe it. Even if they had some wealth now, it couldn't be so exaggerated that there was a treasure. Who knew that? Yoon Jin just smiled. "It seems like you don't know much about your own family. Your Xue clan has always been mysterious, How could the treasure be something ordinary? I heard from him that your clan has a secret method to let people reincarnate in a corpse. It's hidden in the treasure. I don't know if it's true or not. The words reincarnate in a corpse made Gong Yimo frown deeply. She didn't believe in these things. Gong Dai, who was beside her, also frowned slightly, as if he thought of something, but didn't dare to ask. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.